Good evening, everybody. The clock's just struck 5, so I'm ready. We'll get started. Give me the nod when we're live, Tom. Good evening, councillors, officers and members of the public. Welcome to this meeting of Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name is Carla Denyer and I'll be the chair of this committee. This is my first time ever chairing a formal council committee, so please be gentle with me as I inevitably make a few mistakes. First of all, I should draw your attention to the safety information, which is near the top of the agenda. And since it's my first time, for the avoidance of mistakes, I'm just going to straightforwardly read it out. If an alarm sounds during this meeting, everyone should please exit the building via the way they came in, through the main lobby, and then down the front ramp, and then assemble on the paved area in front of the building on College Green by the flagpoles. If the front entrance cannot be used for any reason, then alternative exits are available via the staircases 2 and 3 to the left and right of the conference hall, and then you can exit via the rear of the building, and please don't use the lifts. Okay, first of all, I just want to apologise that the agenda has been rejigged a bit, and you'll have seen that one of the supplementary documents was a rejigged agenda. Sorry for that, that was a combination of technological difficulties and new information about what might or might not be exempt and therefore what the most sensible order to do the agenda was. So sorry about that. Which leads me directly on to the next point, which is that I am not expecting any part of this meeting to be an exempt session, contrary to what was published in the initial papers. So when the initial papers were published, we didn't have the City Leap report yet, as you'll have seen. This was because the officer due to prepare it was on leave, so they weren't able to meet the original deadline. I'm getting some feedback here. Testing, testing. I'm going to sit back a bit. Yes, so we believed that it was going to be exempt, but then when the report was received, we saw that there was no information in that needed to be exempt, and so after a little bit of checking, we had it confirmed that it could all be in public session. The one exception to that is if members have questions which are exempt or the answers to them are exempt. So as chair, I will reserve the right to go into exempt session if the questions head us in that direction, but based on the papers, I'm not expecting that. So just so you know. And that will be the last item on the agenda so that it has minimal impact on members of the public forum, because then if we do need to kick you out, it'll only be right at the end, just before the finish anyway. This meeting is officially scheduled to last until 7:30. I think there is a little bit of a risk of overrun because we have a lot of chunky items. I will aim to finish at 7:30, but just giving you prior warning that it may go as late as 8. If it does look like it's going to be nearer 3 hours, then I will arrange for us to have a little comfort break at some point. Okay, next agenda item is apologies for absence, and the only one I've received is Councillor Gollop with Councillor Weston substituting, and I think that's it. Shout now if I'm wrong.
Correct, Chair.
Great. All right, next agenda item is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest they want to declare? Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, this is Hartcliffe Community Park Farms on the public forum. I am a former director of Hartcliffe Community Park Farm, but don't actually have any involvement any longer.
Thank you. And I think I saw Councillor Weston's hand. Did I? No. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bradshaw's hand.
Thank you, Chair. To declare a non-pecuniary interest in that I'm a council-appointed non-executive director of Bristol Holding Limited and Bristol Heat Network Limited. Although these conflicts can be managed according to our procedures, I've informed the shareholders' representative of my intention to resign from both boards as soon as their successor can be found.
Okay, thanks very much for letting us know. Okay, moving on to the annual business report next. I'm going to ask Lucy to present this, if that's okay.
Yes, evening all. So I'll quickly take us through this report. So point A then is to note the membership. So if you could please just agree that you have noted, it's as set out in the report. If so, I shall move on. So point B is to note the dates and times of meetings in 21-22. Now you'll see from the report that actually we haven't set any of the other OSM meetings yet. So following discussion with the chair and the other lead members, we are hoping to do that over the next few weeks. The next meeting is likely to be in September, and we're aiming to have 6 meetings of OSM this year. Is that okay with everyone?
I can say a little bit more about the rationale for that, if that's helpful. So yes, sorry that we're not able to set all the dates for the other ones yet. You'll all be aware that at the moment the forward plan, the Mayor's forward plan for business going to Cabinet does not look very far ahead, which makes it very difficult for us to set our forward plan. As most of you know, I've been pursuing all possible avenues to improve that situation and make sure that we do have more visibility of what Cabinet are going to be agreeing over the next year. And I have been assured that that situation will be improving soon. So it makes sense for us to wait until we have that information, and then we can set the timings of our OSM meetings to sensible times that fit in with the timetables of various important proposals that will be going to Cabinet. So it's momentarily on the back burner, but not forgotten about. And we will hope to set those dates soon.
Thank you, Chair. So point C is to note the scrutiny terms of reference, and we've got them listed for all the commissions there. There was one particular point I wanted to raise about budget scrutiny, which is whilst it sits in the OSM tour, members, hopefully you'll agree, you've indicated you'd like to delegate that to the Resources Scrutiny Commission this year. So that's just the only thing that I'd like you to note and agree, if that's okay.
TOR is terms of reference for the public.
Thank you. Point D is about mayoral question time. So some of you will know that we have provision in the Constitution to have 4 sessions of mayoral question time throughout the year. And the chair and leads have indicated that we'll diarise those later in September once we've set the OSM meetings for the rest of the year, if that's okay. So the final point from me then is just to talk about call-in very quickly. So we've set out in the report the call-in arrangements and how the subcommittee operates. But can I just draw particular attention to the chairing arrangements, please? Because following a decision by OSM about a year ago now, the chair does rotate between the political parties. So it follows the same order as the golden motions for full council and has been agreed by the whips. But I just want to check you're happy with the order as set out, if you could agree that. If so, thank you.
Councillor Weston? So we're starting from the beginning as we're in a new electoral period. So it would start with Labour, then Conservative, Green, Lib Dem, Labour, Green, as listed on page 18 of the papers. Any other questions or any concerns about that way of doing call-in chairing? No, can I take that as agreed then? Lovely, thank you. Just a gentle reminder to everyone to use your mics. I didn't notice, but I think you may not have done then, and so Councillor Weston wouldn't have been picked up. For the benefit of the public, he just asked a technical question about who would be chairing committee meetings. It's all sorted. Okay, so is that you done on the annual business report? Yes. And does anyone have any questions about the annual business report more generally? No? Great, okay. Okay, so next on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting. I have a disadvantage here in that I was not at that meeting. So those of you who were at that meeting, would anyone like to propose any amendments, or are you happy to accept it as a correct record? Okay, so I'll take that as accepted then. Okay. I will take those of you who were there at your word.
Just say not one person present here appears to be on the list of the last meeting.
I see. Well, we will have to take it as read then. Okay, next up is Chair's business, but I don't have any that I haven't already said in the introductions, so moving swiftly on. Public forum. We have 6 statements and 2 questions. I'm going to change the order of these slightly. So the first statement is David Redwell, who's not able to attend. He's asked Christina Biggs to present on his behalf, and Christina also has her own statement at statement 5. So with everyone's consent, I'm going to allow Christina to do hers, both of hers back to back at the beginning so that she can then head off, if that's okay with everyone else. Great. Okay. In that case, Christina, over to you. If you can do the David Redwell one first so that people can follow along in their papers, and then your own after that. Thank you.
So poor Dave is in Swindon, I believe, no visitors allowed. I'm sure we're all thinking about him. As David points out, there's WECA needs to do a bus plan, and we need to encourage them to get this bus plan in place by the 2021 deadline. I'd also like to add to that Metro West Phase 1 and 2 are in the WECA pipeline. We need to hold them to that deadline. The Portway Park and Ride should be being completed this year, and we need to just keep asking WECA through whatever channels we've got to keep that going. St Anne's Station, as you know, has got some money now to look at St Anne's Station in detail, so we'd like to encourage the council to take an interest and advocate for that to WECA. I'm afraid Dave's got far more grasp on detail of buses than I possibly could ever have. So my point, sort of morphing into the clean air issue, I'm hoping Marvin is watching this or will watch this at some point. Marvin made the point last week about why aren't the air quality people lobbying on putting buildings in the centre of Bristol. And I have to say that my personal preference is the transport-focused development option that was mooted by the Joint Spatial Plan by WECA a few years ago. And the idea there is not necessarily to put every single building in the centre of Bristol, but to focus on transport corridors and look at places where there are railway stations or could be railway stations. So for example, Thornbury, if you put the railway back into Thornbury, you can make Thornbury into quite a nice town with lots of good amenities for young people and make a thriving place there, rather than a kind of dormitory situation where people don't have enough facilities where they live out in the countryside and have to repeatedly come into Bristol. So if we get the rail links right, we don't necessarily have to build in the centre of Bristol. The other point being that if you want to build in the centre of Bristol, it's extremely important we sort air quality first, because there's no incentive then for people to move to the centre of Bristol if it's got such awful air quality. So moving then on to the Central Clean Air Zone issue. So I'm representing the Bristol Clean Air Alliance, as well as Fosbury previously. Katrina, my colleague, is going to talk a bit more about that. I hope you've managed to read my slightly lengthy statement this time. I wrote this statement with a desire to explain the narrative, to really explain why we particularly frustrated about this latest delay to the clean air zone, what we're afraid of. So what we are afraid of is further watering down. We know that many business interests want to take the Portway and the Cumberland Basin out of the clean air zone. And we'd like OSM to be aware of not just the issue of fleet change. So the idea of having the Portway in the clean air zone is to precipitate what we call fleet change, which is where businesses think, well, we just have to change vehicle. We're not going to try and drive around the zone. We're not going to just pay occasionally to go into the zone. We have to change vehicle, because that's what we want. We want vehicles changed from older than Euro 6 to Euro 6 or under diesel. So diesel is still okay as long as it's at Euro 6. It'd be wonderful if people went electric. It'd be wonderful if people went to cargo bikes. It'd be even better if people didn't drive to work, but we had the workplace parking levy so that people were incentivized to take the bus and train to work, cycling, walking, all of these things. The second thing I'd like Osm to be aware of, which I've laid out in my statement, is the issue of what we call HAS calculation. Now that is the 300 deaths. Okay, so we've heard about 300 deaths. That is what is being publicly understood to be the reason for this clean air zone. But it is true that this calculation of 300 deaths doesn't have to be done legally by the government. All the government cares about is achieving exact compliance with the 40 microgram per meter cubed in the city centre. That's all the Bristol City Council actually have to do legally. But our argument is that if you just meet that standard in the middle of the town, first of all, the people in the middle are already receiving at 40 micrograms per meter cube double the average for Bristol. So already, even with legal limits just agreed with, we're still seeing huge health problems in the centre of Bristol. You've seen the asthma map. Suzanne Audrey set out a beautiful.
Sorry, Christine, if you could wind up.
Sorry, yeah, I need to get off as well. So please, Osm, it's a moral issue. Marvin has accepted the moral challenge. So the HAS calculation is the go-to calculation for total impact of public health on Bristol, and that you really need to get on top of that. Otherwise, there's absolutely no point putting clean air zone in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As you'll have seen, I'm being a little lenient with public forum, as we tend to be in scrutiny commissions as opposed to full council, because there's usually fewer submissions. But yeah, if everyone can keep to 2 to 3 minutes each, then that'll fit us in the time available. So thank you very much. All right. Next up is Dr. Suzanne Audrey, but I don't see her. No. Okay. All right, in that case, Councillor Mark Weston, off you go.
Remembering the microphone now. Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you've got the statement before you. Our concern is regarding, I suppose, the scrutiny and how we audit the LEAP prospectus. Now, obviously, the discussion later we thought would be an exempt. It's not. But our specific concern about those governance arrangements isn't actually on the presentation. So, Chair, you're going to find yourself in a privileged position that you're going to know everything that's happening in all these companies in the same way that Councillor Gollop was during the energy company fiasco. But you're going to be the only one. And so you're going to have inside knowledge that no one else will. And what we're concerned is we don't want to see a repeat of that situation. And so we're looking at how, and we think that Osm should look at how they can be cited on what is going on and provide effective scrutiny as it's going on. Not obviously understanding the commercial sensitivities around it, they need to act fast, but that complete lack of information, and Councillor Gollop had this, where he knew things were happening and he knew no one else in council knew what was going on, except 2 or 3 others. This is a problem. So we're flagging it for you, and hopefully we'd like it to be considered by Osm in the work programme going forward.
Thank you. And just to confirm that the officers who will be presenting on the City LEAP agenda item were not able to be here in time for the public forum, but will be here by about past. And I think there is an intention for them to answer those points in your statement. But if you don't feel that they have adequately, then obviously you can raise that at that point.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Katrina Billings next, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I really don't know what else to say. I hope you've read my statement. I am just so dismayed at the lack of action from the Cabinet and the Mayor on the Clean Air Zone. 2016, this saga has been going on since. And I can give you more information. I could tell you more about how air pollution is so bad for us all. But what's the point when there's no reciprocal action from the City Council? And just this morning, I read online that it's more or less proven that the unborn child suffers incredibly from air pollution, yet the mayor's saying build more houses in the centre of Bristol. It just doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then statement 6, Peter Finch, but from Hartcliffe Community Park Farm, but I don't see anyone from that organisation here. No, okay. And then question 1 was from Joanna Booth, but I also don't see her here. No, okay. Well, that ended up being quicker than expected then. Never mind. All right, so in that case, we'll be going straight on to agenda item 8, which is the clean air zone. And I think we're going to start with a brief report from Adam Crowther, and then we'll go straight into the scrutiny session. So I'll just give Adam a moment or two to get up here and plug his laptop in. While he's doing so, I'll just say thank you to the public for your statements and questions. As always, they are appreciated, and I'm sure that members of the Commission will have read them all in detail and may well be incorporating some of those points into the questions they'll be asking later on.
Hello everyone. It's my first time back in the office for 18 months, so I haven't plugged one of these in for a while. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick update on where we are with the clean air zone. Bit of background first. So November 20, our outline business case.
Sorry to interrupt, Adam. You can actually take your mask off because we're a sufficient distance and it may help your audibility. Go for it.
Spring, summer of 2020, obviously COVID hit. So we looked at what the implications of that were for the zone itself. At the same time, the government announced the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and we proposed a number of different schemes across the city centre in particular to mitigate the impacts of COVID and also look at how we could improve sustainable transport across the centre of the city and see if that could also improve air pollution across the central area. So that was principally the Bristol Bridge scheme, but also a number of other cycle routes such as Park Row, Upper Magdalen Street. In August 2020, then we received a new ministerial direction. That basically told us we had to keep working on the existing scheme, which was a small CAS-D with a medium CAS-C. So the small CAS-D being the charging zone for private vehicles in the central area, private cars, and the medium CAS-C being the larger zone for commercial vehicles. They also asked us to provide evidence of any new proposals by December 2020 and to submit our full business case by the 26th of February 2021. Central to all of it was that we had to implement the zone as quickly as we could and deliver compliance by 2023, which was the year that the government wants us to be compliant by. The requirement there was to implement the medium CAS-C with a small CAS-D by the 29th of October 2021, unless there was evidence this isn't necessary to deliver compliance by 2023. So that was the direction that JACU gave us, to submit the full business case by February and then implement the zone by October. October 2020, then we did a consultation on the two options available to us. So one being the small CAS-D in the central area. So all vehicles charged to enter that small area in the centre, and the other being the small CAS-D for private cars with the medium CAS-C for commercial vehicles, which is the larger zone. At the same time, we modelled the impact of the street space schemes and the fast track measures. So that's all the changes I've just described around Bristol Bridge and other locations. The point of doing that was that we expected a number of those schemes would be retained, and therefore we needed to adjust the baseline modelling to show what the impacts would be of those schemes on any zone moving forward, so that when we modelled the preferred options, we would have those schemes included, so we'd know what the impact would be. We then provided the evidence to JACU from that modelling, demonstrating that with the street space scheme in place, a small CAS-D, so that's just the charging zone in the central area, would reach compliance in the shortest possible time by 2023. So the full business case was submitted in February, 26th of February 2021 as required. It sets out the small zone in the central area, which is a charging zone, and just to be clear for everyone, for all vehicles that are non-compliant. So diesel vehicles, that is Euro 3, no, Euro 5 and below. That's about 2014 for a private car. And petrol vehicles, Euro 3 and below, which is about 2004. So that charges all vehicles, private cars, buses, coaches, taxis, HGVs, LGVs, etc., with higher charges for the larger vehicles, smaller charges for the smaller vehicles. We also had a number of fast track measures, the main one being Cumberland Road closure inbound. So it was closed already due to the collapse of the wall, but that closure will be retained when the wall is repaired. So it creates a bus gate and effectively reduces traffic coming in from that direction. The location of that bus gate is yet to be determined. We'll be consulting with local people before deciding exactly where it goes. Since the FBC submission then, we've been working closely with government and we've also been discussing closely with Bath and Birmingham what's been going on with their zones, particularly how people have responded to the packages available for upgrading vehicles and such like. We've looked at boosting support for businesses and residents. So a lot of the correspondence we received, I suppose, requested more support to help people upgrade their vehicles or to change their vehicles. And we've also finalised a summer 2022 launch date. This gives people more time to prepare and ensure compliance in the shortest possible time. It's worth noting that as soon as you announce you're putting in a zone, obviously people start to upgrade their vehicles. So you have a kind of, if you like, a sloping line of emissions that are going down as people improve their vehicles. And having more time to help to put the zone in just means people can upgrade their vehicles during that period of time. The summer 2022 launch date will be confirmed with JACU when they've finished our FBC. We're expecting that to be approved in the autumn. One other point to make is it's quite a complex piece of work and a complex program. So the government has a number of systems that our systems have to feed into to enable all the charging to happen that matches with the DVLA database, etc. I think we're all aware that government IT systems are not the quickest projects to ever go ahead. So that's quite a complex piece of work. And we need to make sure that that is right in time for the scheme launching. The financial support they will start in the autumn. So if we get the approval of the FBC in the autumn, the financial support can start straight away, and that will enable us to start helping people to upgrade their vehicles. So the proposed support that we've got in the plan has been increased. So our initial bid was for 35 million. We've now increased that to 45 million. This is a bid to JACU, so we're waiting for their views on it and for their approval of it. We have 1.8 million for low-income earners, residents and workers in the zone. The low-income threshold has been increased to 26,000, rising up to 27,000. So that was 24,000 pounds previously. We have 32 million pounds to help businesses upgrade to cleaner vehicles. 2.1 million specifically for bus and coach companies. We've had a lot of campaigning from the coach companies in particular about their difficulties with upgrading their vehicles. So we have a specific pot for them. 720,000 pounds for the Old Market Gap cycle scheme, which is completing, if you like, the work that was done around Old Market just to finalise that cycle route linking the Castle Park route through to the Bristol Bath Railway path. And a number of one-year exemptions. That includes residents and businesses in the zone, low-income earners, patients and long-term visitors to the BRI hospitals, community transport vehicles and blue badge holders. We have done a lot of work with the BRI to identify what they need to help people access the hospital appropriately. So we're still on track to reach legal compliance in 2023. I suppose if I use my arm again, you've got that slope. At some point in that slope, there's a kind of vertical drop when the zone comes in. So pushing it back doesn't necessarily affect the compliance date. That's what our modelling indicates. You still have the step down and we still have the slope. So we're still showing compliance by 2023. The zone reduces traffic in the city centre. So our modelling is showing about 2,000 vehicles per day fewer in the city centre. That doesn't mean they're all going around the outside. What the modelling shows is that it reduces traffic volumes overall across the city. So not by huge numbers, but by enough to have a significant impact in that central area. That's from about, I think, about 14% or something along those lines of people changing their modes or just not doing their trips at all. Air quality still improves on most of those roads surrounding the zone. So this is one of the key things we've had discussions about previously in Osm, is the impact of roads around the zone. So there's 2 points to note really. Firstly, that reduction in traffic helps reduce emissions across the whole city. So the fact that there's less traffic driving into the city centre means there's less traffic driving through roads to get to the city centre. Secondly, what the zone does is it improves the whole fleet. So I think what Tina Biggs was referring to earlier about cleaning up the fleet. A bus that goes through the zone that is clean is also going through Church Road clean, in the same way that a van that drives through the zone is clean. It's also clean when it's going along Winterstoke Road, for example. So that cleaning of the fleet means that those vehicles, when they're further out in the city, are also clean, which is why the benefits then are provided to the rest of the city as well. 71% of vehicles are expected to be clean enough when the zone comes into play. That's because people are already upgrading their vehicles. As I say, your petrol car has to be pretty old to be non-compliant. Diesel cars, not quite so, but we are expecting people to upgrade vehicles. That process will be accelerated by having the support measures in place that people can then make use of to improve their vehicles. The charges are collected by government, so the money goes to government. They then deduct a fee for use of the systems that they've set up, and then we then receive the remainder of that funding, and that will be ring-fenced to reinvest in projects that improve air quality in and around the city. So there's 3 things that we've kind of earmarked for that, which is potentially improvements to bus services, livable neighbourhoods around the zones, or improvements like traffic management related improvements around the zones to mitigate the impacts of any diversionary traffic, and also further support for upgrading vehicles. And then last slide. So the size and zone of the boundary is designed to improve air quality targets in the central area the shortest possible time. A key thing that has been raised is the Cumberland Basin being within the zone. We have done some assessments, and removing the Cumberland Basin would affect our ability to comply. It is a key route in the city, that's why it's in the zone. I suppose the explanation I've given to people is, if, for example, you lived in Clifton and twice a week you drove down to sort of Ashton Gate area, and then twice a week you drove into the city centre, if that route isn't included, 2 of those charges aren't captured, and that then delays your decision on upgrading your vehicle. So including it is about capturing zones that don't necessarily go to the most polluted parts, so that those trips that do go to the most polluted parts also get improved when people upgrade their vehicles. So we've done a lot of assessment of that, and our position is that the Cumberland Basin will stay in the zone. Okay, so take any questions.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to cheekily take Chair's prerogative and start off the questions, and then I'll throw it out to everyone else. I've got a few. My first one is, so the full business case that was originally submitted in February has now been adjusted. Was that adjusted at the request of the government, or was that the council that initiated that, or both, or someone else?
I mean, any business case process is a bit of toing and froing between ourselves and government. So they, we prepare our case, they look at it and say, well, what about this? What about this? We respond with appropriate answers to those questions that are raised. And then that opens up a dialogue. So, there's always been a desire to increase the amount of support we can give to people. So that's been something that we've been pushing for in those discussions with government.
Thank you. And then direct follow up to that. There were some questions about this at full council and member forum last week. And if I interpreted the answers from the mayor correctly, it sounded like the adjustment of the full business case to incorporate better mitigation for low-income residents and businesses was the cause, or is the primary reason why this has been delayed, because JACU needed longer to look at those. Is that an accurate understanding?
That's one of the key elements for the delay. I think a full business case or something like this is a very big, complex thing and document, and it requires quite a lot of discussion, as I say, to and fro. So, we've been having those discussions. The JACU have 2 panels called DERP and TERP, which is the technical and, I can't can't remember what DERP stands for, but they have these two boards that sit there and assess our submission, and they will then come back with further questions about what we've submitted. So we will then provide extra evidence as part of that process. And yeah, that's, as I say, a kind of two-way conversation between ourselves and Jackie. And as part of that, obviously, we've wanted to provide that extra support and find ways to deliver extra support, which has resulted in delays.
Thank you. I've got a couple more questions. They will be quick. Don't worry, you'll all get your chance soon. So next question is, there isn't really a way to phrase this that doesn't come across quite provocative, but I don't mean it aggressively. In terms of sort of deciding the best route here, is the council's objective legal compliance, or is it minimising harm?
So I think, you know, we've been clear about this previously, that we don't necessarily believe that the way the government have dealt with this whole air quality issue is the best way of dealing with it. If they had invested over a longer period in sustainable transport modes, we could have more quickly moved towards cleaner air in a more sustainable way. The way we're being asked to do it is to reach that target, which is what we're doing with the zone. But in doing that, we're trying to implement as much kind of sustainable transport improvements as we can to keep driving that improvement. So the closure of Bristol Bridge, the removal of traffic in that central area, trying to improve the bus services and the cycle routes through there is what will lead to that continual improvement in air quality. You know, vehicle engine improvements, switching to electric vehicles will do so much. Getting people onto more sustainable modes is the thing that will keep delivering those improvements longer term. So we're following the technical process that we have to, but we're also taking additional measures. So, you know, the closure of Bristol Bridge and schemes like that were brought forward very quickly. And you know, if you look in the central area, we've already got evidence from the pollution monitors in places like Baldwin Street of the significant improvement in air quality in that area. So we're trying to reduce harm as far as possible, meeting that compliance and then going further with more sustainable long-term measures.
Thank you. Can I just check on audio levels? I suspect that Adam might have been slightly quiet, but I don't know if it was just me. Might be worth bringing the microphone forward a smidgen. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And then one final question related to that, which is, have you estimated whether there is any substantial harm to health, for example, from the start of the CAS being delayed? So I understand that the compliance date won't be affected, but one would assume, I think, that if the start date is later, that there will still be people who are affected by that 9 months of less of having a clean air zone in place. And I wondered if the council had made any assessment of that.
So we haven't assessed that in any detail. I would say, yes, if that vertical bit moves to one side, then you've got a bit of pollution there that wouldn't have been there otherwise. But I would also say there's been a significant drop in that central area where obviously a lot of people live and a lot of people spend time from implementing those schemes, which weren't part of the original CAS proposal. So when we submitted our OBC, those sort of changes in the central area weren't part of that scheme. So there have been steps taken to, I suppose, mitigate any further delays by rapidly improving air quality in that central area.
Okay, thanks very much. Those are my questions done, so I'll now throw it out to the rest of the committee. I saw Martin first, Councillor Foda, and then Councillor Weston, and then Councillor Wilcox.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got 3 questions. Firstly, is with reference to this bid of measures, which we are awaiting the response from the government, that you've described. Yeah, I think it's about 2.5 years since I asked in one of the briefings whether the government was going to take into account the economic and social impacts of how we solved the problem. And I recall being told quite clearly, no, the task is to get compliance. But if our bid is focused on additional measures that we've asked for funding for to get compliance in a particular way, what's the likelihood that those will be accepted if they didn't think those were valid reasons for putting off compliance?
So, I mean, we included quite a number of things, and a number of those things they said, this is not directly driving compliance, so we're not including it. The things that we still have in there are things that do drive compliance, so are viable for them to fund, and they are funded elsewhere. You they have to decide how much to give to us, and we'll wait and see what they decide to give to us. We've bid what we've bid for, and we've set that out as being our requirement to hit 2023, i.e. having enough to upgrade vehicles is a key part of the proposal.
Okay, thank you. My second of three. The bid you've described, the measures that are in there, with the exception of the old market gap, which I think was a proposal that was previously announced anyway about a year or more ago, is what I would call sort of modally neutral. It's all about letting people keep a vehicle, but potentially change the vehicle. So it doesn't support any of our other objectives for congestion or accidents or anything like that. Is that the only set of options that were proposed? Because other than the additional funding that might be revenue that might accrue, you've only mentioned those being invested in modal shift buses or whatever, kind of at the end of the proposal when we start earning revenue rather than forcing the sort of changes. So we're not directly driving any modal shift, are we?
So as I said a few minutes ago, if I was given the chance as to how to clean up air, I'd probably do it in a slightly different way. We put in a number of suggestions along the lines of sustainable transport improvements, and it was a kind of a mixture of, is that deliverable in time to drive compliance? Because it takes quite a long time to design up, consult on, and then deliver highway schemes. And secondly, there's a view to some extent that those things are funded elsewhere. So the government is giving us active travel fund money for cycle schemes. So from a JACU perspective, they're there to implement clean air. They see, well, you've got a pot there that's delivering cycle schemes. Why do we need to fund cycle schemes for you?
Okay, thank you. And finally, it is in the background material that there is a small sum of money supporting studying the impact of particles from wood burning. That isn't part of the legal compliance, is it? So it's about 2 years since the Mayor said there would be a clean air strategy that would tackle that. And I think it was about 18 months ago, the council was going to debate tackling wood fuel pollution. But does this take us a step closer? Is it likely to lead to any action?
I'd probably need Alex to answer that one. He's just sat behind us there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Councillor Fodor, behind you. So I'm Alex Minshall. I'm Seymour City and Climate Change Manager. Evening, everybody. I just wanted to say that, that project is a separate project that's not part of the Clean Air Zone work. And it's a research project working with DEFRA, looking at monitoring within a particular neighbourhood air pollution with citizens and seeing if we can use that process to help change the burning of solid fuels and the contribution that they therefore make to the particulate pollution. The Clean Air Zone will help in some way with particulate pollution, but it's obviously its primary focus is the nitrogen dioxide pollution. And so it's a separate thing. I think it was included in the report so that you're aware of the wider range of things that are taking place.
All right, thanks for that explanation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect my views on Cumberland Basin inclusion are probably not universally held by other colleagues in this chamber. My questions, though, are twofold. First of all, the surplus will be returned to the council. Do we have any estimates on what that might be? What numbers we're looking at?
So the business case that was submitted in the FBC estimated at around £17 million. There's a lot of fluctuation in that. So there's a number of sensitivity tests in the document as well that explain it could be anything from nothing to kind of £25 million. From the sensitivity tests we've done, our estimate has come out around 17 million, but we will get a much better picture of that when the zone comes into play and we start to see how many people.
70 million over what period?
I think that was over 3 years.
Thank you. Okay. Second one, when it comes to the bid for additional support, the 45 million, first I heard of this, excuse my slight cynicism and skepticism, was in the immediate run-up to an election. So I'm just curious, were we tipped a wink that actually maybe the government would look beneficially on this, or was it sort of a Hail Mary pass in a pre-election period? Now, I realise you can't really comment on that, so let me slightly rephrase that. Were we tipped a wink to put the increased bid in?
So I mean, the bid amount has been in there since
It was
the
10
start.
million originally, and then it went up to 45.
No, it was 35 million or so. And the extra money has come about from those discussions with JACU since the FBC was submitted in late February time. There's always been a substantial amount in there, and most cities have bid for similar amounts of money to mitigate the impacts.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is that all from you, Councillor Weston?
Yes, it is. Sorry, thank you, Chair.
Right. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. So I've got some questions around this £45 million figure. The items that you listed there come to about 38 million. And the next paragraph details the supplementary support measures. Can we have some guarantees that most of that money will not go to funding people's fines who need to visit the hospital?
Yeah, so we're not going to be paying people's fines. We're going to be providing a number of exemptions on certain specific criteria. So I don't have the exact details of them, but we have talked a lot to the hospital about what those should be. And the hospital themselves are very committed to clean air, which is, you would expect. So they don't want to be overly generous either. They want to be fair and reasonable, but ensure they're also helping to address the issue. So yeah, we wouldn't be paying people's fines. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure there was enough money for the modal shift options that Martin talked about. The other thing is, where is the quote for actually building the automatic number plate recognition system that will actually monitor the traffic going in and out? Is that part of the 45 million or is that on top?
No, so that's the implementation pot. So there's a pot of money for implementing the scheme. This is the money for mitigating the scheme.
Okay, and how much is that pot?
Oh, I'd have to check the latest figures.
Tens of millions, or?
So we were given £12 million last year to implement the CCTV elements. There's more than just the cameras. Obviously, there's the systems and all the other stuff. So it's not millions. It's more like tens of millions. Now that we're going with a smaller scheme, it will be slightly lower cost because we're going with the small CASD rather than the bigger scheme.
Okay, and what checks and balances are we putting in to actually monitor that the scheme is being successful?
So there's a package within the bid for additional monitoring, so additional tubes dotted around to monitor pollution levels across the city as part of the scheme. We're also working with JACU about doing a kind of deep dive assessment of the scheme and how well it works and what the pollution outcomes are as well.
And the Mayor has stated that a problem that has not happened cannot be mitigated. When asked what will be done to mitigate the effects of the predicted growth in traffic on neighbourhoods adjacent to the clean air zone, yet he is proposing to mitigate the effects of the clean air zone by creating a budget to buy more cars, how can this be defended?
So in terms of the kind of additional traffic on roads around the zone, the volumes are pretty small. The reason being that most vehicles will be compliant. So 70–80% of vehicles will be compliant when the zone comes into play. The way traffic works, it tends to find a level. So when traffic moves that is not compliant, moves away from going in the zone to going around the zone, it will mean that the routes through the zone are slightly easier and slightly quicker. So traffic that was going around will then go through and it will kind of balance itself out. There's also a general reduction in traffic from the zone overall. So you kind of get a slight reduction anyway. So the highest increase in flow, I think from memory, was 500 vehicles a day across the suspension bridge, which was quite a bit more than any of the other changes. And in terms of mitigating those, I'm not necessarily sure that it's going to be those main roads that will be the issue. It might be more of the residential roads around them where we see some degree of rat running that we need to mitigate. It's going to be quite hard to see what that is until the zone comes into play. It's a big area to cover, and we also need to understand what level of funding we might receive before we can commit to implementing funding to improve those areas.
I look forward to standing on Muller Road and having a clean air experience then. We shall see. Also, the Citizens' Assembly stated that we need to set a target that 80% of all journeys in Bristol should be by active travel and public transport. And we know that 50% of the particulate matter that causes pollution is caused by tyres and brakes. And due to the increased weight of electric cars, this can be worse. Why then is the main way of mitigating the clean air zone to increase in more cars and is there a missed opportunity to embrace the Citizens' Assembly recommendations?
As I said before, I think, given freedom, we'd probably approach clean air in a different way and implement more spend the money on more sustainable transport improvements, because the long-term aim of the council is to get people out of cars and onto other modes for trips that are appropriate for it. The overall impact of the clean air zone is that it does reduce vehicle trips overall, because there is a percentage of people that change their mode as part of it, and there's a percentage of people that don't do the trip in the first place. So we do expect to see a reduction in car trips overall from the zone. It's not huge, it's not as big as we'd like, obviously, and it's not going to get us to 80% sustainable trips. It's part of what we're doing. We're also looking at the mass transit options, also rapid bus transit options, as well as the active travel for fun schemes that we're delivering as well. So there's lots of different ways that we're looking to get that mode share, and then the CAS will be one element of it.
All done. Okay, Councillor Morris. Tim's next after you.
Thank you. Just a few thoughts, really. So the comment surplus return to council to reinvest in traffic projects and sustainable projects. Can we ensure that these are spread, the benefits are felt across the city, not just by those areas inside or next to the zone?
So I think in terms of the three things we're looking at, one of them is providing additional support to the businesses and residents to upgrade their vehicles. That would be citywide, but as ever, there will be a focus on those that are most affected, as well as those on lower incomes. The other one being potentially improving bus routes. That would affect whoever is on that bus route, so that will be from the outside to the in. In terms of the kind of traffic management impacts and livable neighbourhoods, that does really need to be around the edge of the zone, because that's where we're likely to see the changes in trip patterns. That said, if we are able to invest funding in those areas, it means that other funding can be invested elsewhere in the city, because it helps us cover that area.
Yeah, that would be good. Do you feel that this plan is reducing accessibility to South Bristolians to employment?
I don't think significantly. It goes both ways. People from North Bristol need to get south of the river. People from South Bristol need to get north of the river. As I say, we expect the majority of vehicles to be compliant by the time the zone comes into place. We also have specific funds set aside for different groups to upgrade their vehicles. It's not going to affect the buses. The buses are all going to be compliant by the time the zone comes into play, so we'll still have that accessibility in place.
What I'd like to see is some form of joined up approach. So there's no bus route from South Bristol which would get people to work to start at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is the time that a lot of the employers down there would require their people to start, and conversely the return later in the day. So what work is being done to understand, the needs of the employers in Avonmouth, and how the city and the transport links can support people from all across the city to get to work at the time that they are needed to be there? Because my concern is that I know people living in South Bristol who are going to end up paying £9 a day or go a much longer route to get to work, and is going to hit their take-home pay.
So the government recently released a national bus strategy. As part of that national bus strategy, local transport authorities, which in our case is WECA, have to put together a bus service improvement plan. Now, previously, that sort of service wouldn't be commercially viable, which is why it wouldn't be in place unless the council could fund it, which we generally haven't had money to do. One of the intentions of the national bus strategy and what the government is looking to see in bus service improvement plans is improvements to those sort of services, so you're having a more, I'm not going to say 24/7 bus service, but a bus service that serves people at the times it needs to be there. There's £3 billion allocated for it, which isn't enough money. WECA will be putting a bid in. We'll be contributing to the development of that plan. where we feel the necessary services are and where the improvements could be made. I can't guarantee that it's going to provide extra services to Avonmouth, but that's obviously something we'll be considering. And, you know, we'll have to see what funding the government provides for us to do that. I think that's probably the best option for delivering those sort of improvements. And that will be being submitted in October time.
Okay, I think that'd be good to see that. And my final thought is, you know, we mentioned the BRI, trying to get people to access the BRI without using a car. The bus routes don't support that at the moment. You know, so if you come from Stockwood Ward, you get the number 2 at the top of Union Street. You've then got to walk down, walk up a hill, and if you're unwell anyway, that's quite a journey, quite an undertaking, really. So what plans are there to try and improve that service? Because I think the recent experience of moving the number 2 bus stop at Temple Meads, not aligning it with the hospital bus service, has led to people being less than satisfied.
So we have been having regular discussions with the BRI and also the university as well. And part of those discussions are about what we can do with the bus services. It's a little bit difficult to commit to anything until we understand what kind of income we might have available, but we have been talking to them about what services might look like. And similarly, when we're talking about the BSIP, the Bus Service Improvement Plan, it's something we'll be looking to consider in that plan as well. Yeah, the difficulty with the hospital is it's just kind of in the wrong place in terms of where you can provide bus priority relatively easily. So we need to look at how we can put in specific services that can mitigate that link into the services that are where all the services go along kind of Haymarket area and provide links to a regular service that gets you to the hospital. So we have been having those discussions. We don't have a kind of final outcome yet. And actually, you know, whilst the delay is not ideal, it may give us more time to implement something.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask on that? You mentioned that that would be to some extent dependent on WECA. With the bus improvement plan, would you suggest that Councillor Morris made these same points via WECA scrutiny or his colleagues in his group on that? Would that
I think
be
that's helpful. I mean, you know, we as an authority would like to see a very ambitious bus service improvement plan. Clearly, you know, we've got big ambitions to improve buses in the area. We'd like to see as much, you know, of that as possible. I know, you know, WECA are committed to improving the bus services as well. So I think, you know, it will be well received and I think it will be helpful.
Great, thank you. Councillor Kent next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Morris. He covered a few of the issues I think I wanted to raise regarding bus connections with South Bristol. I think my concern is the time frame. Everybody would like to see improvements. I don't see any improvements being made within 12 months. So it seems to me that lost opportunity here to really ramp up our bus provision as people want to return to work, return to the city centre. Just looking at a couple of the issues, I noticed within the documents, you talk about the M32 park and ride. Have you considered accelerating the delivery of any other park and rides around the city? Obviously, I have a particular park and ride I'm particularly interested in.
We would love to. The difficulty from a Bristol perspective is that most of the park and ride locations are not in Bristol, so we have to work with neighbouring authorities. We are expanding the Portway Park and Ride as part of the rail station that's going in there, so that will be improved. We're looking at the Brislington one as part of the Bristol to Bath corridor. The A37 Park and Ride is not moving forward particularly quickly at the moment. I will expect that to be linked to whatever emerges from the SDS that WECA are putting together in terms of housing. Again, we'd have to look at what locations are available with North Somerset and discuss with them as to where they can go. We are trying to bring forward park and rides as quickly as we can, but it's not an easy process and it's not something that happens in a couple of years either. So we did try to include a bit of funding and commitment to an M32 park and ride within the clean air zone proposals, but Jaku not unreasonably said that that's probably not deliverable in time to deliver compliance in 2023.
Okay, thanks. Around 30% of vehicles of my residents don't comply, so they'll be facing a charge if they drive in to the charging zone. The grants and loans you've talked about, When will the detail be published for how people apply for those, or is it already available?
I'd have to check on when it will actually be published. I was going to refer to the BARS scheme, but obviously that's only for the commercial vehicles, not for private vehicles at present. We're anticipating bringing the scheme in the autumn. So there will be a fair amount of time between the autumn and summer for people to take advantage of the scheme. We've also got, I believe, about £6 million in the bid to do the outreach and engagement with people to help them understand what their options are and how to engage with the various options. So that piece of work will be going on at the same time to ensure that we're reaching as many people as we can. I can speak to the team and find out exactly when the details will be released if they're not released at present.
Thanks. I mean, if you can try to make that early autumn, I mean, particularly for small businesses, it's a big expenditure, and they want to be able to plan. And obviously, if you're running a small business, especially if you're a sole trader, this is a big chunk of money that you might need to find, especially if you don't know what loans will be available, what grants will be available. So the sooner they can get that information, the sooner people can make those choices, which you obviously want them to make.
Yeah, certainly, and that it's a key thing with the delays to get people more time to make those adjustments. In terms of businesses, they can look at the Bath scheme because we're going to be following what Bath did in essence fairly closely, and that's what we've been advising people to date. But I will come back with a more detailed answer on that for you.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Pearce. I think you're not on yet.
Thank you, Chair. Adam, risking putting you on the spot here. With the money that's likely to be rebated to us by government, I hesitate to ask, what can you spend it on? What can we spend it on? Because experience teaches me that very often it's easier to say what you can't spend it on than what you can. So is there anything that's specifically excluded? And would it be possible to use it in match funding with other existing schemes? And referencing Tim's point around businesses and small businesses, would it coincide perhaps with the try before you buy battery electric commercial vehicles scheme as well? That's the bit that's putting you on the spot, really.
So in terms of what we can't spend it on, it basically has to be spent on things that improve air quality. So we can't spend it on adult social care, for example. We probably couldn't spend it on things like resurfacing unless maybe we were resurfacing the cycle route or something to improve it. So there will be that test. Using it as match funding, I'd have to check the details. I don't see any reason why we couldn't use it as match funding. The slight fly in the ointment will be having an understanding of how much it's going to be before we can commit to doing anything with it. Because obviously our colleagues in finance are going to want to understand exactly how much we're going to get before we start committing to things. So, we'll need the scheme to be in place to understand whether the assumptions were correct or not. What was the last bit again, sorry? The electric
battery electric commercial vehicle try before you buy scheme that we've got in place.
Again, I don't see why we couldn't use it for that if we wanted to. There's not really that much detail as to what you can't use it for, if you like. It's basically, it needs to be improving air quality across the city.
Thanks, Adam.
Okay, that's all the hands I had. Does that mean that we are done on this item? I have a proposal just before we wrap up. So I thought that there were some very good points in the 3 public forum items that we had on Clean Air Zone. I was particularly struck by the public health statistics in Dr. Suzanne Audrey's statement, but I think there were good points in all of them. I am minded to refer these to Cabinet. So OSM has powers we have a designated slot on the Cabinet agenda. The next Cabinet meeting is tomorrow. and the usual deadlines for public forum don't apply to us. So we could refer these 3 statements to Cabinet and they would appear as a late item on tomorrow's papers. Could I get a sounding on what people think about that idea? You can just sort of give me thumbs up, thumbs down, if that's helpful. Okay, I'm seeing either thumbs up or abstains, effectively, no thumbs down. So, okay, on that basis, I'm going to go ahead and Lucy, if that's okay, we can put our heads together afterwards to quickly throw that together.
Chair, if I may, I would, as a former occupier of your seat, I would commend you do that. This body should make more references to Cabinet than it currently does or historically has.
Great, thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Fodor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I supported that and I endorsed that comment. But my query would be the graph you were describing that gets to the point of compliance and then the step change that might be later. Do we have figures on the public health implications? In other words, the number of early deaths in that gap?
I asked that question already.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize, I missed that because that's the significance of knowing about all those impacts. Okay, could that be included in the reference to Cabinet so that it's quite explicit?
Yeah, I'll include that in my preamble, although it's kind of implied by one of the 3 public forum statements, but I will draw attention to it. Yeah, thank you.
Chair, I think that's the number that government has to answer for.
Okay, thank you. Right. All right. Thank you very much, Adam. I think we're done on that agenda item. Apologies to John Toy, who we've kept slightly waiting. Yeah, feel free to come up and get yourself plugged in. Okay, over to you. Nope, you're not switched on. Just the big middle one at the bottom.
Slightly better. Marvellous. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about the draft consultation strategy. We were really keen to bring it to you while it's at a formative stage, to get your views on the draft aims and objectives and the action plan and the performance indicators and targets. And also, we're at a stage where we're bringing together our thinking on deliberative processes and working out how to wrap that into the strategy rather than taking them forward as separate projects. And I'd really welcome your thoughts on how deliberative processes fit within the Council's consultation and engagement activity. So I'll talk for 10 or so minutes on why we're putting together a strategy and why we're doing it now. And then, as I said, I'll run briefly through our aims and objectives and give you a flavour of what the action plan looks like. The draft strategy was circulated before this meeting, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at some of the detail. And then at the end, I'll talk about next steps and timeline. So a commitment to put together a consultation and engagement strategy was in the communications strategy that was launched a couple of years ago. And it's fair to say we've made some recent strong progress in tackling some known issues, challenges that face us in getting feedback from citizens. So you can see in the top chart on the right that we've doubled over the last 4 years the average number of respondents to our citywide consultations. And another group from whom we have heard less over the years are people in the most deprived 20% of our communities. The chart on the bottom shows how we've been bringing the ratio of responses from deprived and non-deprived communities closer to parity. So the red line at 1 would be equal proportions from high and low deprived areas. We're moving in the right direction, but have some way to go. So the strategy is designed to formalise and agree aims and objectives and an action plan that will help us to achieve those sorts of successes more widely. In terms of timing, we were some way towards having a strategy ready in February 2020, and then went straight into a period of upheaval. But I think that delay gives us an opportunity to build on lessons we learned from how we did things during the pandemic, how we did things differently, and also lessons from Bristol's first Citizens' Assembly. And we're proposing a 3-year timeline to coincide with the period of the new administration. So as background to the aims and objectives, this chart shows some of the learnings from the Quality of Life survey, which shows that a fairly small proportion, around 1/4 of citizens, agree that they can influence decisions that affect their local area. Now, that we know is due to a whole range of things beyond consultation and engagement, but we feel that some of the things we can do in liaising with citizens and other stakeholders can do something to address that perception. So the first 2 aims are to ensure that citizens and stakeholders in Bristol are listened to and can help shape policy and services that affect them and the city. And closely aligned to that is to help citizens understand how and why decisions are made and how they can influence those decisions. We feel that those 2 in combination will help to build trust between the council and the people we serve. The last of the aims is prosaic but really important, and that's to make sure that we meet our legal responsibilities to consult. We don't want legal challenges because of the delays and reputational damage that that will cause. So we've then put together 4 objectives that should help to deliver those aims. The first is to engage early and effectively with citizens and other stakeholders. The sort of do minimum that tended to happen during the height of funding constraints was to go straight into formal consultation before a decision's made. We want to be engaging earlier and meaningfully at a stage when decisions or proposals are more formative. Secondly, we want to continue to increase the number and diversity of participants, and I'll talk about that very briefly in terms of our performance indicators. We also recognise it's important that once a decision's been made, that we provide information about how people's feedback actually help to influence that decision. And lastly, we want to build skills and capacity in consultation engagement throughout the council, so it's not just the preserve of a sort of central core team. This is an example of the action plan. We have elements of the action plan for all 4 of those objectives, and we ask the question, what are we going to do? When are we going to do it by? Who's going to do it? And what's the point? And we propose to review that action plan annually. This is a busy slide with a long list of measures of success. Looking first at objective 1, ensuring we engage effectively and early, we put together 2 early proposals to use quality of life indicators. And we've had some early feedback that those indicators may well be too influenced by external factors. So it might be austerity, it might be something like Brexit, and actually that could counter lots of good work we're doing locally. So we're going to look at some indicators to replace those top 2 that are less susceptible to those factors outside our control. We're going to, under objective 2, continue to try to increase the proportion of people from more deprived areas, and we'll also focus on 3 other groups that we know are underrepresented in our responses. So those are people under 25, on Black and Asian citizens, and people from some of the larger faiths. We will also continue to monitor all the other equalities characteristics as well, but those are broadly in line with the proportions of the population. We know that having accessible surveys and other engagement techniques is a prerequisite to engaging successfully. So we're going to set a target of having fewer than 5% of people having difficulty with accessing the consultations. In terms of sharing information, we have a we asked, you said, we did feedback form, and we want to get that up to 95% of all surveys or all consultations and engagements. It's currently not comprehensive. And we will also be trying to get features into the media on how people's feedback have shaped decisions as part of this building trust and building understanding of that people can influence the decisions that are made. And in terms of building skills, the proof will be that we have no formal complaints or judicial reviews upheld. And we also put a user feedback about our surveys into all of our surveys, and we want to achieve 75% of people who agree or strongly agree there is enough information and that the questions make it easy to give feedback. So lastly, next steps and timeline. I mentioned at the beginning, we're bringing together two processes now. So there's a few TBCs towards the end of this timeline where that process is actually meaning that we're reconsidering the timeline a bit. But we're in a stage now where we're undertaking stakeholder review, and seeking your feedback is a really important part of that. We're looking at the resource needs, and that's one of the things, particularly around deliberative democracy, that may cause the strategy and the deliberative processes to become a key decision. So once we've worked out what those resource needs are, then we'll work out whether it's a key decision. We've briefed two cabinet members, Councillor Craig and Councillor Cheney, and EDM have had a look at it. Going forward, it'll need to be reviewed by the Mayor's Office, by the Mayor's Strategic Board, and ELM, leading to a decision in the autumn. If it becomes a key decision, it would be a cabinet decision.
You just gave us a whole string of acronyms there. Could you expand some of them for us?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot here.
EDM, ELM, possibly some others.
EDM is the Executive Directors Meeting. So that is the meeting of the directors in resources, because this is a resources project. And ELM is the Executive Leaders Meeting, which brings together all three EDMs, all three executive director meetings. Because this is very much a cross-cutting project that affects all parts of the council's activities, we feel it should go to executive leadership meeting.
Thank you.
So really over to you. I'd welcome your feedback on what I've presented and what you've read.
Great, thank you. A couple of you got in early and caught my eye while that presentation was going on. So I'll go to Councillor Pearce first.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, John. That was an excellent presentation, which is no less than I expect from you. Thank you. God, do you remember the statement of community involvement? Do you remember those days? One of the things that I picked up on in your presentation was the bit about feeding back to participants how their feedback has influenced the decisions and the proposals that are made. It was something that we were very keen on in the statement, avoiding acronyms, in the development of the statement of community involvement. And I think that it's perhaps the most important and valuable element for building trust between citizens and any organization that they're engaging with. And in this case, that would be us. And I wish that more organizations gave that feedback as well, because the tendency for citizens is to think, well, they asked for our opinion and now they've just cleared off and we've got no idea what they did with what we said. And fixing that, I think, is really valuable. So I just want to thank you for keeping that in there and majoring up, feeling it's so important that you've presented to us on it today. Thank you very much. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
wash it, wax it, and put it out there.
All right, thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Weston.
Thank you very much. No, I did like the acronym thing. It was sort of reminding me of the Good Morning Vietnam. You know, if the VC is such a VIP, should we keep it on QT, or the VC will find out we all end up on MIA and then it'd be a cape. Anyway, I just loved it. I did have some genuine suggestions. First one, you touched on deliberative democracy, but I realised it wasn't what you were majoring on today. You might just want to pass on to colleagues about how the deliberative democracy panel is created. One of the problems we've got, or we've noticed, is actually of 4 of the 5 largest wards in the city, they return 12 councillors in total, only have 3 members of the public sat on it. So actually, Hengrove and Whitchurch Park doesn't have a single member on the citizens panel at all. So there are some glaring gaps. They might need to fill that if it's going to serve its purpose. It occurred to me that one of the biggest things when we're talking about empowering skills, I think it was on your 4th objective on there, is probably something that Lucy and her colleagues and everything else have learned here, is the ability to do online forums and consultations. We've all had to learn this, but often the organizations that we deal with, sort of maybe the neighborhood forums or other groups, community groups, aren't that good on it. Some way for the council to train them, provide a bit of a steering on how this works, I think would be very, very welcome. Also, because I don't think they're going to go away, even when we do face-to-face. There are some people that, for example, if they've got parenting responsibilities, they can't leave home to go to a meeting. It could be single parent, there might not be an option, but they could Zoom in at 7 o'clock and give their thoughts. So if there's a way for the council to provide that support to them, I think it will be very welcome across a whole swathe of the city. And that links into the area committee structure as well. I'm interested to note the multi-faith, the issues around the larger faiths not engaging. I find that quite strange, because actually these organizations do actually have structures in place, and I find it strange that we're not plugged into those yet. Now, obviously, I can't talk about other faith structures other than Church of England, you know, and the parochial parish councils and various other things. But since there are those structures in place, is it not possible to plug into them? You know, so if you're doing a consultation in an area, to say, well, actually, parochial parish council of Henbury and Brentry, St. Mary's, can you give us some feedback on this? That's already there. There's probably an email list somewhere. I realize GDPR is all fun and games these days, but considering the bishop is just over there and there must be an equivalent, I just would have thought that the Multi-Faith Forum might be able to play a part in passing this out. I just wonder whether they've been engaged, and that's a question to you.
Fine. I'm conscious that the first couple of points, I think, were points and very valued. Would it be helpful if I come back on those as well?
Yes.
Thank you. So let me deal with your question first, which is around faiths. I think, so certainly we do have a list of stakeholders, and it includes the Voice and Influence Partnership, who in turn sort of coordinate activity by a number of equalities groups, including the Multi-Faith Forum. So we do already reach out to those groups. I think we need to do something different because the proof is that the response rates are still low from Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs. The other faiths are broadly represented. I think there may also be a reporting issue, because our baseline for the proportions of those faiths come from the 2011 census, and you've probably got the right person sitting here with Nick Smith, but we have a sense that people may fill in the census about their faith differently than they do in our survey. So it might actually just be a data mismatch, but clearly that's a helpful suggestion for other ways to reach faith groups. In terms of wards that weren't represented with the right number of citizens' assembly members, we had 7 different selection criterias, which were age, sex, disability, ethnicity. Geography was one of those, alongside deprivation and employment status. And within each of those 7 major criteria, you then have to have bands, divisions. Now, you can't cut a cake of 60 people absolutely perfectly to get every one of those groups to match. So we divide the geography into 5 different areas, and within that, randomly, you will get some variation. You'll get some wards that have nobody and neighbouring wards that are slightly overrepresented. And that is just, you know, if it was a sample of 2,000 people, you could get a better match, but with 60 people, you can't achieve every target perfectly. So that is why there is still some unevenness.
Microphone.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that the north is underrepresented, the south, the centre is overrepresented in that data. No, I understand that. I also made the comment about reaching out to groups with training them how to do Zooms and things like that.
That's a really helpful suggestion, and I'll take that away. Thank you.
Okay, as chair, I'm just going to gently encourage you to be succinct in your questions and answers so that we don't compound the delay that we already entered this agenda item with. Councillor Kent next.
Thanks. I'll try and be quick. Just to sort of clarify, you won't get rid of that statistical anomaly with 2,000 people replying, because once again, Hengrove and Whitchurch Park will be at the bottom of your list of people replying. As you will see, if you look at any consultation, people from Hengrove and Whitchurch Park often don't engage with the council. So it's good to read through this. One measure you could do to help us, help you solve that problem is to have the standard length of consultation at 12 weeks. At the moment on the document on page 5, it refers to consultations typically being 6 to 12 weeks. I think that encourages people to potentially think, oh, well, I'll run the consultation for 6 weeks. If we can encourage the standard to be 12 weeks, that will give us the chance to help you get those consultations out to people in our communities and get them to engage. So just sort of a small point there, which would be good if you could take up. I guess the other thing was just building on that, then one of your key measures are these KPIs. And I did see you did touch on that there are issues then using those KPIs. I mean, they are quite a low bar at the moment. I mean, my own ward on people who believe they can affect decisions in their local area is 12%. You're lower. You're 10, I think. So what worries me is that the council will claim victory when they move that up 2%. So I think in particular, looking at those KPIs, what I would be interested in seeing is some really stretched targets being set, especially amongst the parts of the city that feel the least engaged with the council. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
I think I might encourage you to collect a few points and come back to them all at the end, if that's okay.
Fine, yeah, thank you.
Great. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. And following on from Councillor Kent's last point about the measures of success, there may be external factors, but I also think we need to understand why people do think like that. So if you really want to understand it, you may need to look at whether they feel there's been a lack of investment in those areas over decades. So that, I think that's probably one of the key points there. But the bottom line is with consultations is that people care when the issues impact them. So maybe what we need to do is have a clarity at the outset of the consultation to actually explain why you should participate in this. And then following on from the comment that Councillor Pearce mentioned earlier, then that feedback loop becomes a lot more effective, because this is what we want to achieve from this. This is what you said. This is what happened. And I think that's key for me, is why should I sit down and spend 20 minutes filling out this sheet of paper or do it all online? What impact? And then finally, sheet of paper or online, how are you going to reach those people that are technically less able, capable, or just totally isolated and don't have access to the internet because everything's being driven that way? Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got some couple of questions about the section about encouraging citizen-led initiatives and the asset-based community development approach that you be taking. What resources are you actually going to give to people to actually do this approach? And what monitoring will be in place to actually make sure that you're delivering this, as opposed to actually the council physically helping people if they've got a query, as opposed to debating about whether they've got a query or not, but actually helping them. And the other thing is, in that myriad of graphs that you provided in your report, you talked about wanting to get more engagement from faith groups. And you don't actually provide any stats about the non-faith groups interacting with you. So we don't know what the level of interaction of non-faith groups is to qualify the fact that you need to do more interactions with faith groups.
Okay.
And I'm really interested to find out what scale of the non-faith groups are interacting with the council.
Okay, I've got one question and a couple of suggestions. Oh, sorry. Did you have your hand up? Oh, I'm really sorry. I wasn't ignoring you. I genuinely didn't see.
I did wave, but obviously I'll have to find another way of attracting attention instead. I welcome this report, very much so, and it reminds me of the situation with the libraries consultation. Now, my own ward is amongst one of the most deprived areas of the city, and we tend to get very low participation in anything like this. And that was made absolutely clear by the number of comments that came in from Westbury-on-Trim, for instance, which is, you know, very close to Southmead. Loads and loads of comments, very much lower from Southmead. And in my area, they absolutely value their libraries so much, but they're not good at doing consultation. So it's a case of finding different ways of engaging them. We've had a lot better numbers, if you like, responding if the council actually comes out and stands around and talks to people. And that's worked really well in the past. And also, have you, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it's in the report or not, have you considered using local online and printed newspapers? Because we've got the Mead in Southmead, which is delivered to every single household free, and also is on there's an online version. So I'd just be interested if you considered any of those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if you can cope with it, I'll chuck you one more question and a couple of points and then get you to sum up and answer those, if that's okay. So I just had a question about, in the report you've said that there was a big fall in people feeling like they could influence decisions in 2017 specifically, and that this was national. Do you know what caused that? Was that related to the Brexit or the 2017 general election or something around there? I feel like that's a stupid question, but I can't think what it is.
Okay.
And then I've just got a few suggestions. I completely agree about the local community newspapers. There's lots of them. Many councillors have a regular column in them, and I'm sure that, and they seem to get a huge readership. So that would seem like an open door. I also agree about the 12 weeks. If 12 weeks was standard, then more councillors would be able to mention it in e-newsletters or paper newsletters, which are typically approximately quarterly. And I know from experience in my ward that when I pushed a consultation in my paper and e-newsletter, it got the highest response rate of any transport consultation that the staff I was working with could remember. So it makes a big difference when councillors tell you to fill things out. Do you know what? I have a couple of others, but I feel like I'm overloading you, so I'll come back to those in a second if you want to.
Thank you. Right, this may be in no particular order, but let me take the 12 weeks first. We used to consult for 12 weeks, and the 2017, your neighbourhood consultation was for 12 weeks. Our experience was we had around a quarter to a third of responses in the first week, and another quarter or a third in the last week, and then hardly anything in the weeks in between, or obviously much less per week. And by moving to 6 weeks, we haven't seen a drop off in the number of responses. Now, I think it may be horses for courses, and one of the things that we always try and do is balance the delay and the impacts of delay of a very long consultation period and against trying to reach as many people and making sure that nobody gets left out. We went for 6 weeks and occasionally, and we always review, are there particular groups that might need longer? Or is there a national holiday or some other event that means we need longer? So we're not wedded just to 6 weeks, but we have found it to be a good balance that hasn't impacted on response rates. I will take that away, and it would be useful to understand more about the sort of time periods, the frequency of some of those newspapers that you talk about. So taking that point, for every consultation or engagement, we put together a comms plan that looks at what will be proportionate to reach people, and who's the audience, and what do we need to do that's different for those audiences. Picking up on the point of how do we reach people who aren't online, so we do use local newspapers, we use the Pigeon, we use the Voice series, we contact all councillors to try to ask you to put it into your communications. On some of the larger surveys, we actually send out paper copies, and we've found out sending out 10 or 20,000 paper copies and targeting those at the most deprived 20% of communities is really good at boosting response rates. So that your neighbourhood consultation that you mentioned had 27 times as many responses from Westbury-on-Trim per capita as it did from Hartcliffe. On recent surveys where we've done this really targeted technique on the budget, for instance, we've ended up with almost hitting the target population in terms of responses. So it is always a balance of how much resource we can put into it and what's appropriate. But one of the actions, I'd love it if you could send me details of your local newsletter and what the kind of cycle is, and we will try and factor that into our comms plans. In terms of a low bar, in terms of KPIs, I don't like low bars, and I want to set challenging targets. I don't want to set targets that are just going, bound to fail. And we have you've seen that we've, doubled the average response rate. There are other communities where we need to do more in terms of increasing the proportion of responses from Black citizens, for instance. At the moment, we are at about a quarter to a third of the representative response rate for Black citizens. So I'm trying to set a response rate that is reasonable. But I welcome your specific feedback on that or any particular areas. And also what we can do to help you reach your communities in those wards that are underrepresented. There was a question around, there was a point made about making it clear why it's worth responding. Yes, I agree, and I think it's really worth putting that right up front in our surveys. In terms of external factors that led to that drop-off in confidence that people can affect things locally, we don't think it's just a Bristol thing because other local authorities experience something similar. We don't know exactly why it happened, but it did coincide with a lot of the disillusionment around what people can influence following Brexit and the delay in actually bringing that to fruition. And it also coincided with the second or third year of peak austerity. So those might be two things that caused it, but we can't track that. But it has led to this recommendation. We look for something that we are actually more in control of as a measure. In terms of the asset-based processes and resources and monitoring, that is something that's largely led by community development. So I will need to talk to them about how they are doing that specifically. This is intended as I manage the consultation engagement team, but this is a citywide strategy, and that is one strand that I know less about than some of the others. I think I think I've covered all the points, but if I've missed something that you mentioned, please point it out to me.
So that's a fresh hand, Martin. I'm just going to chuck in the points that I held off on to avoid overloading, and then I've got Steve Pearce, and then I've got you. Yes, he put up his hand again for a little thing that he's forgotten. Oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't see that. Sorry. Yeah, do feel free to, like, if I haven't seen your hand first time, then it's not that I'm ignoring you. I just don't have eyes on all sides of my head. So do wait till I've turned your way and make sure that you've caught my eye, and I will always add you to the list if I know that you've put your hand up. Okay, so I just had a few suggestions to chuck in. You were asking for reflections on the Citizens' Assembly, particularly. I mean, I think it's been, the deliberative democracy, I think it's been very promising, but I guess I would just reflect that the rebooting democracy motion that initiated it also called for a pilot of participative budgeting as well as a Citizens' Assembly. And so let's not make sure that that's not forgotten about, and it would be great to see an experimentation in that, perhaps in area committees or elsewhere. And perhaps there is a role for us in Scrutiny to help investigate what exactly that could look like. So yeah, let us know if you'd like to come back with a particular proposal for that. Also, in terms of, where am I? Page 54, you were talking about increasing the number of people you reach by increasing subscribers to the Ask Bristol e-newsletter by cross-promoting with other email newsletters. Could I also suggest that you consider cross-promoting it in the booklet that goes out with the annual council tax bills, and perhaps with other printed council letters as well, because that would be a good way of reaching people for whom we don't have their email address, some of whom may not be online, but some of whom may be online, but just aren't digitally connected to the council in that way. And I can certainly say from my experience of residents in my ward that people won't feel that's off topic to put it in a thing about council tax, because the vast majority of people sort of don't think of the council as a group of different departments, but as one homogenous thing. So they wouldn't think that that was, weird or off topic for it to be in there. And I think it could help reach a lot of extra people. Right, I will go to Councillor Pearce and then Councillor Fodor.
Thank you. This is a really quick one. John, could you drop a note to the group officers and ask them to collate the local free sheet newspapers, because we do all know which our papers are, and we can produce a list for you.
Fantastic, thank you.
I've no belief in working harder, always work smarter.
Thank you, and Councillor Fodor.
Thank you. Firstly, the skills and support part of it, I endorse the objectives. One is building skills and capacity. What about building skills and the capacity or support for members? Members are frequently pointed to as community leaders, but don't get any backup whatsoever from the council for the outreach they do. Now, we do, for lots of reasons, do outreach and use these columns and things like that. But, the most we've ever heard of is a postcard gets delivered in our neighbourhood because the council's agreed to do something, not because we've asked for help to do something. So could you consider the council as the resource that can be nurtured as well? Secondly, the feedback issue. I welcome that. I'm slightly surprised it wasn't considered something that should be done as a matter of course. Prior to the abolition of neighbourhood partnerships, we always had "you said we did" columns, but maybe that was a different bit of the council generating those. But they were responding to all the things that came up in our neighbourhood partnerships, so which I know you've taken part in very helpfully in the past. So, surely we should have been doing that, but I'm glad it's going to be addressed now. It should be there as a matter of course. In terms of deliberative democracy, what we have at the moment in Bristol is a pilot. And it's a pilot that's only done the sort of one of two topics or kind of rounds, plus not yet done the participatory budgeting that was also suggested. I mean, this week, the London Borough of Newham said they would make it a permanent feature. How far off might we be from Bristol considering it a permanent feature of what gets done? One more is the involvement of citizens, the percentage involvement. You talked quite rightly about being glad it's increased. And then you finally mentioned the budget outreach, which took roadshows out to bits of Bristol that were hard to reach. What was the cost? Is that really a barrier? Because to my kind of experience, going out to where people are always gets more input. But is that a cost that we've thought was too much to bear? I know you've said it needs to be targeted, but is it a big part of a budget, or is it an increment that we should try to do? And then finally, the accessibility of our meetings. I know it's not in your hands, it's something Lucy's probably worrying about in terms of democratic services, but the hybrid meetings are really important to me, because the 1 minute someone gets to speak at a planning meeting or a cabinet meeting or something like that could take them 3 hours of their life if they can't do it via sort of Zoom, monitoring a meeting on YouTube. I mean, coming into town, getting childcare, moving if they can, if they've got a mobility handicap, all of those issues are barriers, but I'd like to know how soon we will get that. I know people are working on it, but to me, yes, there are those without either the equipment or the broadband contract and Wi-Fi, both of which are barriers for the other part of the population, but surely it's something we should prioritize, because it's actual council meetings where decisions are being made, like not just planning, cabinet, full council, chance to ask the mayor, that we need people to still have access to as well. I know it's kind of complementary to what you're talking about, the surveys, but it really, to me, it'd be good to know when that might happen.
Let me come back quickly on those. So the future of deliberative democracy, in terms of what has been done already, it is one of a number of suggestions that were in the original Golden Motion, and actually you got a kind of 3-in-1 questions with that initial citizens' assembly. We are looking at all options and looking at what the costs of different options are, and whether, we are seeking feedback from decision makers about whether it is the sort of thing that would be a commitment to do on a regular basis and then work out what the question is, or whether actually we're better at looking at what are the major questions and then what methodology is the right one to deploy to find the right answers. All of those things are up for grabs at the moment. Thank you for your suggestion of building support for members. I would like to explore that more. I mean, I think you are an enormous resource that can help us reach more people effectively. So if there's something we need to do to help you do that, I'm all ears. And the last point, the last point was around going out into communities and doing interview surveys. That's the thing that we did successfully. It is really resource intensive. So we did it to target communities that we hear from less, and we would go to supermarkets. It takes quite a lot to organize, and then it takes lots of people, lots of hours to do it. So my team helps to coordinate 60 or 70 different consultations and engagements a year. And we would be looking at additional resource, probably external resource, which would have a cost implication if we are going to do that more widely. But we do recognize that pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, it is one string to our bow.
Okay, I think that is everything on that agenda item. Give me a wave if I've missed you or forgotten something. No, okay. Thank you very much for bringing this to scrutiny at an early stage. I'm sure I speak for the whole committee when I say that we appreciate it. Now on to Nick. Apologies for keeping you waiting for performance report. Just to say, while Nick is setting up, this will be a short agenda item. After this, I'm just going to check some logistics with you all regarding signing off the statement to Cabinet, and then I'm going to suggest that we have a quick comfort break before we continue. Yep, we've got it now.
Right at the bottom. Lovely. Thank you. There isn't a presentation for this. It's a brief item. This is the Q4 performance report. I've just popped that on screen and we can go to any points that you wish to look at in more detail. So to clarify, this is the year-end outturn from the year that has finished. This went through director reporting in May, and it's gone through the process with yourselves. It would probably have come to Osm earlier had there not been the elections and delay following that. And it's also at Cabinet tomorrow, essentially the same report. The summary points are noted there. It was a little bit over half of the indicators, about 80 indicators over the course of the year. This is linked to the business plan for the council for last year. Around half of them just over hit target in the end, and a little over half of them were improving on the year before. Obviously, there was a lot of impacts of COVID throughout the year, but the targets had been set at the beginning of the year, knowing that we were there was a lockdown and there was going to be impacts of COVID. And there was about a dozen indicators that had been suspended that otherwise would have been in the business plan last year. Okay. I'll just pull up the summary page, as that's the more relevant one. That's got some of the key points. It's structured around the themes of the corporate business plan, the council business plan.
Sorry, I'm getting a wave. I suspect it might be related to legibility.
No, actually it's not. It's the empowering and caring quadrant at the top of the page there. It says reduce the number of households in temporary accommodation, target status well below. If it's well below, should it be green, or should it be well above?
That's a point of clarification of the way this report is written, because obviously the performance reporting has been through many iterations over many years. The current for the last 5 years, I'd say, is that we mark it based around whether it's better or worse. So if it's red and below, it means it's worse than target. Now, usually worse is physically lower, but sometimes worse could be a higher number, but it will still be marked as red and below target.
So that should be...
It may be a higher number, but it's worse compared to what we want it to be.
It's written correctly on the form because it makes sense for there to be a consistent way round of writing it on the form. You just have to eyeball these a few times to get your head in it.
It's a bit like local authority accounting and the use of brackets.
Yes.
Nobody understands that.
If I can just make a couple of quick introductory points before I throw it open for questions and comments. So we're not going to be spending long on this at this particular OSM. I'm aiming for something like 10 minutes. We could go a little bit over that if necessary. But I know that that's not really adequate, and I intend to spend a much chunkier amount of time on looking at performance reporting at a future OSM. So these performance reports always come to scrutiny commissions, and it's part of our job is to look at them. But certainly in all the time that I've been a councillor, they've always come towards the end of the agenda. There's never enough time allowed for them, and councillors always do the same, skimming over them, pointing out a couple of like obviously bad ones, but not actually having enough time to discuss what the council should do about it. And I think it's fair to say that's a pattern. I've been speaking with Lucy, who's going to arrange for us to get all scrutiny members, not just OSM members, to get some training on how to scrutinise performance reports specifically, which is a bit of an acquired skill. And that's going to be with Ed Hammond from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, which many of you will have already met as he ran some other training for us recently. We don't have a date for that yet, but that will be in the diaries soon. And then I find it's always best to apply the learning that you've taken on board straight away. So we'll then look at performance in more detail after that, and then we can have longer to properly get our teeth into it. So I just thought I'd say that because I know that at least one of you, because they contacted me, said, how the blooming heck are we going to get through all of these things in this meeting? So we're not going to in great detail this time, but I promise we'll come back to it. Right, yeah, Councillor Fodor.
Thank you. Yes, and I know it's also awkward for you to go into detail of things that are all collated from all the far corners of the council, but there's one that stands out to me, and looking at the sort of red indicators, is the unspent apprenticeship levy. And the reason it stands out to me is because I got some of that allocated at a budget amendment to actually train our own staff in things we want to be able to do, which is to improve energy efficiency in our own council housing. But what worries me is kind of if that's consistently being unspent, surely there are bits of the council that should be actively making it their business. So this is a generic strategic issue. Why are enough bits of the council not finding ways to train our staff using apprenticeship levy that is available constantly, annually? Because it shouldn't be unspent year after year. We've got people who need to add to their skills and do the work we want to do, such as retrofitting council homes or indeed any other projects, do better kind of walking and cycling schemes, all sorts of things that skills and training are needed for.
Absolutely, and I know that it has been a big priority of the council over the last couple of years to raise the profile of this. Jane Taylor, I believe, is the head of service who's been heading up in the last 2 years work on this. But absolutely, that's a change that we made last year was to elevate the level of this indicator so that it was higher up and be seen more at appropriate levels, because it was a couple of years ago, it was a lower level indicator, and it was identified that there needs to be more of a council-wide push on this.
Could I follow up, Chair? It's just the point being, we're a council that wants to develop its staff, and here's a fund for that. I mean, it needs to be kind of briefed to all managers potentially, doesn't it? Not just seen from a senior level, but all the teams who might have training needs, which ones can be met by this sort of several £100,000?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's fair to say that is done, and Mike's probably in a better position to give the details.
And Mike has just indicated he'd like to add something.
So I think it's a fair challenge, but just to reassure you, we have been alert to it for some time, and there have been wide-scale and extensive briefings and encouragement to managers to take up the opportunities. Until very recently, part of the problem has been the availability of apprenticeship schemes in those areas that the council is actually looking to, recruit younger members of staff, or to support existing members of staff with their development. The breadth of apprenticeships available, though, has increased quite significantly more recently. So we do think there are going to be more opportunities going forward. But just to reassure you that the lack of take-up has not been because of lack of awareness. There have been some practical difficulties, but we recognise it is something we need to do better. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot.
And I should say for people watching at home that Mike Jackson is the council's chief executive, as we didn't introduce you at the beginning, for anyone who's wondering. Noted that it's on that, but I think I should still take it in order. So it was Tim next.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try to be quick. In People's Scrutiny Commission, at least one member has raised with me who sets these and how are they altered. I think they felt that certainly in certain areas of People's Scrutiny Commission, the targets are inadequate. And I guess I'll give an example, although they didn't give me an example. My example would be under the fair and inclusive. The first paragraph, in fact, tells us the good news that the target is being exceeded for the educational and healthcare plans at 20.4%. That does mean, of course, the target was set at 20%. That means we intentionally set an 80% failure rate. That's not just a target, that's actually a requirement in law that those plans are dealt with within 20 weeks. So we have a target that actually commits the council to break the law on 80% of occasions in dealing with educational and healthcare plans. I take note of the recent government change, which might knock out 1.5%, but still, I think that's an example of where certainly has been raised with me that some of the targets they don't feel are acceptable at people's scrutiny. So I think the real question is, how do you go about setting these and who ultimately decides on them? Thank you.
Sure. The targets are set with the relevant heads of service and directors. So they're signed off at the beginning of the year with through the EDM process. And for this year, also in conjunction with cabinet members. That's for the year coming. With the example you noted there, you're absolutely correct. 20% is an incredibly low target in the scheme of things. The background to that one is that the previous year, the outturn was 1.7%, I think. So the 20% target was recognizing the work that was needed to be done to get that area back on track. The target for the year that we're now in is, I believe, in the region of 60%, showing that we're expecting a much faster increase in that area.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to jump in on something that Mike said in response to Martin's point on apprenticeships. It's not escaped our notice, and I've got to commend our own training team and the apprenticeship team. They've worked really hard to hunt down additional opportunities for apprenticeships, and they're to be commended for it. If you could feed that back to them, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Councillor Weston, and I believe that's the last hand.
Certainly was my hand anyway. I can't comment on anyone else's. I actually picked up on, you are right when you say we skim through these and then you pick out a few here or there. My concern actually is about the colour coding, that as you skim through, you get false sense of security and false sense of negativity. The big false sense of security is the one that Councillor Kent highlighted, where it's all green, there's a big up arrow. Congratulations, 80% of the time we failed in law. Fabulous. But if you go slightly up on that page, we then have a red arrow, and it's all red and nothing else, and that's talking about the amount of volunteers that come and help their community at least 3 times. The target's 44%. We did it 47.2%. So we're above target, but it's 0.4% down on the year before. So it's now a red arrow and red. So if you skim through this and you're picking out where we've done well, you'd think we've done well on the ECHP. We really didn't. EHCP rather. We really didn't. And you'd think we'd done badly on the volunteering. Or actually, considering it's a pandemic and COVID and everything else, we did pretty well. So I'm concerned that you get the false sense of security, false sense of negativity, and that we need to look at that. I don't have a solution now, but I flag it up. There's an issue there for me.
Yeah, Mike would like to come in on that. Go for it.
Yeah, for me, thanks, Chair. And I think you largely said it in your introductory remarks. We can always tweak and improve the reports that come to scrutiny, but the real issue is they're meant to prompt a conversation. That you will, from the kind of summary information that's up on the screen, it is only meant to draw your attention to a particular area where you then explore and test through questioning and understanding of the issue. So I think, to be honest, there's no way you'll ever get under the skin of what these are actually telling you unless there's the time to do it. And I think that was your point, Chair. But the other point I wanted to make is one of the things this group will need to consider is how what you do relates to what you ask the commissions to do on your behalf, because there is a risk, of course, that you end up duplicating things that the commissions might want to do. So I think you just need to agree a division of labour between OSM and the commissions in terms of who's going to look in detail at these. But as I say, a report like this can only ever draw your attention to things that you then need to pursue through scrutiny, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Just to draw people's attention, I expect Councillor Weston knows this, but for any newbies or any members of the public looking at it, the two relevant things to look at are the colour of the box, which gives the performance, and the colour of the arrow. So if something is red arrow and red box, that's the bad news, because it means it's below target and going in the wrong direction. Whereas the example that Councillor Weston gave there is green box, but going in the wrong direction. So generally, yes, which is what the green colour signifies. So it's not showing red across the board, it's showing a mixture of green and red as befits the figures.
And just to clarify, there will be a programme of work this year to look at the performance reporting process to change them. And ultimately, over the course of the next year, we'll be looking at moving to quite a different format, hopefully with more clickability. And because what we're showing here is just a static picture of the performance reporting not spreadsheet system, but the software that's behind that, and we're moving to different software. We should be able to provide something that's more interactive, or that'll be developed this year.
Is that the famous Power BI that I've heard much talk about?
It will be including Power BI, yes, that's the intention.
Okay, I saw a hand from Councillor Wilcox, and then I'm going to attempt to wrap us up.
Yes, I look forward to be guinea pigging in the Power BI stuff, working with Guy on sorting that out.
Yeah.
That's an aside. My question is, each of these KPIs have a directorate associated with them. Would it be better not to bring those KPIs to the relevant scrutiny committee as opposed to this overview scrutiny committee, because they'll have better idea of what those actual KPIs actually mean? Or is that process already happening?
They do.
Right.
They go to the relevant scrutiny commission, and they're responsible for the in-depth scrutiny of these, and then which is exactly why we need to look at which things we're entrusting the scrutiny commissions to and which things we take responsibility for ourselves, because there are some things that are OSM's responsibility to look at, but not all of them.
Yep, thank you.
And a key difference
the other commissions haven't met yet, which is why this is coming to us.
And a point of clarification in the structure, what you're seeing is based on the council's business plan and the indicators linked to the business plan, where the directorate scrutinies they get all of these in their relevant scrutinies, plus others linked to the directorate and the divisions within that directorate.
Okay. Are there any other questions or points about that? No, in that case, I'll just say that I agree with many of the points made there, especially about EHCPs, which was the standout, misleadingly positive one. And I just wanted to draw attention as well to the statistic about deaths attributable to particulate air pollution, which is to my eyes, concerningly high, 5%. And especially as highlighted in the earlier agenda item, that particulates are not addressed particularly well by the clean air zone. So the fact that that's already high is concerning. But I know that we can't go into any more detail about that now. So just flagging it. All right, thank you very much. Okay, so we will go for a comfort break in just a moment, but before we do, Lucy has pointed out to me that we should just agree the practicalities of how this referral to Cabinet happens, so that we all know what's happening. So my suggestion is that straight after this meeting, Lucy and I throw together an extremely rough first draft. I'm not planning to submit a long statement. I'm basically planning to refer those 3 public statements with a fairly brief covering message from me as chair. but obviously we will have a quite a quick turnaround because Cabinet is tomorrow. So I was going to suggest, because I know that you might not all be on your councillor emails in time tomorrow, that we set a time by which you need to feed back. And if you haven't fed back by then, we assume support. Lucy, do you want to advise what a sensible time for that would be?
I think midday would be sensible, if that's okay with everybody.
Would that work for people?
I assume, Chair, that the statement is going to be something along the lines of these statements were received by OSM. We believe that they flag up very interesting points. We're presenting them to you for your consideration.
Yes.
And that can almost be what it needs to be. Broadly
that. There was a request that I specifically draw out the point, I think Councillor Fodor pointed out, and the officer also did, that it would be useful to know, to have some assessment of if there is any harm caused by a delay to the start of the clean air zone. In the hypothetical graph that the officer was drawing, if you bring that line across, that area under the graph increases, and does that increase in pollution cause a significant increase in health disbenefits, for example. So I was going to draw that out as a particular gap in the information that the council has provided thus far, but other than that, yeah, it was just going to be a general, we think these are important and you should look at them. So is that acceptable if I draft something up and you can all feed back before midday tomorrow? Great, lovely, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to suggest we go for a quick comfort break. Are people okay with it just being 5 minutes to nip to the loo? Lovely, thank you. Okay, back here at 7:15. Is everyone ready to reconvene?
Ready to go.
We back on? Great. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So the next item on the agenda is the work programme. This is a very brief agenda item. Thank you to Lucy for preparing this report, but I will actually be presenting it. I'm sure you've all read it already. It just lays out the way that we will be working, although not all of the details have been filled in yet. So first of all, I wanted to draw members' attention to the key principles, which references a Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government guidance document, which I found very helpful in knowing what we should be aiming for, and some suggestions about how we work. So in a moment, I'll open it up in case anyone has any questions or concerns or disagrees with any parts of that. Also, as I highlighted earlier, we don't have the formal meeting dates yet because of the interaction between our work programme and the Cabinet's forward plan, but we will aim to get those set as soon as possible, and I will liaise with the OSM leads to make sure that those are appropriate. What else was I going to highlight? And then the main other thing to highlight in this is, of course, the work programme. So because of the number of new councillors that are on the council in general and on scrutiny in particular, our proposal has been to set a mini work programme from now until September to cover the things that need to be looked at now. But then to wait until September to set our full work programme for the rest of the year. That allows new councillors to have completed relevant training so that they know what it is that they're aiming to do. So I think you're all aware of that, and the OSM leads, we've already discussed that, but this is just putting this formally in writing. And then in the supplementary document that came later, you can see the mini work programme for the next few months. So that was all I was going to say. I'm just going to throw it open in case anyone's got any questions, concerns or disagreements, and also if any of the chairs of your of the respective scrutiny commissions want to add anything about the things that are on their mini work programme. So Councillor Fodor first and then Councillor Weston.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, and I chair the Community Scrutiny Commission, which is yet to meet, but it's also complicated by the fact it has part of its scope, part of its work is in all three directorates, and a lot of directors and several cabinet members who I'm in part of the way through liaising with. And then we have a Leeds meeting programmed imminently, which is why we haven't got the mini work program that you referred to, the sort of interim one. But one of the frustrations is I know already from a previous cabinet meeting and things I've been directly told that there are at least 2 items scheduled for September in the forward plan. But looking at the forward plan this afternoon, there is nothing after tomorrow in the forward plan. So people know things are scheduled. I need to know whether I'm trying to get the Scrutiny Commission to look at those rather than anything else we would have done over the next month or 2 before September. But there might be 2 items in September we need to deal with, but we haven't been told officially and it's not in the forward plan. So it is frustrating, and I know it's being addressed, but I think people need to understand we're going to find it difficult to actually spend time with subgroups or members of it or of the commission or informal groupings to actually deal with what's popping out of the system when we even know it's about to, and yet it's not scheduled officially. Thank you.
Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Chair. One thing just to bear in mind, I think, will be, and this hasn't, I don't think, happened yet, but WECA scrutiny might well be looking at stuff. That doesn't preclude us looking at things as well, because we'll come at a different angle, different priorities, but we might find that they're doing an in-depth investigation of A, B, or C. So either it might be best from our point of view, we tag with them rather than duplicate it entirely. I merely flag that up, especially if they're getting witnesses and experts down, they might not come down twice. So I just flagged that as a point to note, Chair, that was all.
It's a very good point. I gather that WECA Scrutiny have not yet appointed their chair, which makes that liaison slightly tricky, but noted. Any other points? Say that again.
Yes, Chair, you're not the first chair to tackle this issue. I'll say no more than that at this point. But I reserve my right to make further remarks in future meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Lucy.
Thank you. Yeah, so just further to the comments from Councillor Fodor then. So obviously the work programme is managed by OSM, but the communities one isn't ready to be approved today. So could members agree to approve that part of the work programme by email? Would that be okay? Thank you. And also, were members happy with the OSM Leads proposal around the work programme setting event in September? So that's the conference style event with, yeah, great. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
I can agree with what I want. I'm agreeing with Councillor Gollop and he's not here. So yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, I think that moves us swiftly on to the Mayor's Forward Plan, in fact. Yeah, so I think I do not intend to spend 10 minutes on this agenda item, owing to the fact that the Mayor's Forward Plan currently goes as far as tomorrow, which is not a great deal of use to us. Yeah.
I watch a lot of disaster movies. Does he know something I don't for Friday?
Well, as I say, I have been assured that this situation will be changing. I appreciate that certain members have had such assurances in the past, but I'm going to take that at face value and hope to see a great improvement to the forward plan soon. And if we don't, then I'm sure that'll be coming back here. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions or concerns about the items that are on the forward plan, that if they're worth raising at this stage, or anything else related to the forward plan? Great, we've won 10 minutes back. Brilliant. All right. Next, very briefly, this is only for noting, but yeah, start coming up, because it'll only be a minute, is the minutes from the WECA Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This is only for information, so we only need to discuss it if people have particular things they want to draw attention to. I think I had one thing, bear with me a second. Oh, I think my point was just noting the submission that they'd made afterwards about the Climate Emergency Action Plan update in particular. I expect all of us share their concern about the slow progress and welcome their suggestions to get an update from the Metro Mayor as soon as possible. That's promising. All right. Any more on that, or shall I move on? Okay. All right, so we're now moving on to the agenda item on City Leap. I will just reiterate for anyone that wasn't here at the start. On the agenda, this was originally chalked up to be an exempt session because of commercially sensitive information. It now transpires that the information in the brief report we're about to receive does not contain any commercially sensitive information, so we are not going into exempt session after all. However, as chair, I will reserve the right to do that later if questions from members are about sensitive subjects that we do need to do that. So we're not doing that yet. We may do so later. If we do go into exempt session later, then I don't intend to return to a public session again afterwards. So for those of you tuning in from home, you can go away and have your dinner at that point, because this is the last item on the agenda. So we'll then be closing immediately afterwards. Okay, whenever you're ready, David.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. So today we're going to do a fairly brief, essentially an overview of City Leap, as we're conscious that there are a number of members of Scrutiny who are new to Osmby. So I will get through and then we can go to questions. So I'll begin with what City Leap is, and then sort of a brief history, where we are at the moment, and a brief look ahead. So in terms of what City Leap is, essentially we're looking to take advantage of the transition to the decentralized energy system of the future, create that interconnected, smart and resilient energy system, but that will take substantial amounts of capital, and so we're looking for a partner to come in and work with the council in order to provide that investment. That will leverage off the council's previous leadership, its expertise in terms of the energy service, and all the opportunities that we can provide in terms of undertaking projects on our estate, but to leverage that activity to deliver more broadly across the city to take us towards that goal of decarbonisation. So investment at that scale and activity at that scale clearly generates substantive social value and is a key focus of the procurement as well, that I'll be talking about shortly, and leads into all sorts of potential benefits for residents and communities of Bristol, not least in terms of carbon reduction, but also jobs and warmer, cosier homes. So the sorts of things that the bidders that we were talking to at the moment find attractive is our reputation. Bristol has an excellent reputation in the field of energy. The energy service team that I head up, so a number of major projects, built wind turbines out at Avonmouth and the solar farm underneath it, currently building out the heat network in the centre of the city. And it's to basically put a rocket underneath what we can deliver as a service, because we are only so big and the council only has so much in the way of resources. So, you know, the council has a major role to play in the future City Leap. So in terms of what we're currently procuring, and we're out at the moment, I'll come on to some of the timelines shortly, we are letting a 20-year concession to find a City Leap strategic partner to deliver and fund energy projects across the council estate. That is the concession. So following contract award, we will have a partner in place that we have procured. We do not need to go out to tender again for individual projects, and they can carry out those projects on the council's estate, including our social housing, subject to those projects meeting a number of criteria that we have set, and which we have been discussing with them. And so once we have set up City Leap, it will work with various services across the council, facilitated by a new client function team that we'll be setting up to develop proposals for projects that need to meet these criteria. And it's, you know, do they fit with our strategy? They demonstrate value for money, those sorts of things, technically feasible. So put a slide here saying services in scope. I mean, in essence, everything's in scope in theory. Now, to really emphasize the point, we're not transferring assets here. We're not selling assets, with the exception of the heat network, because they need to take that on and really build it out. And it's, you know, talking hundreds of millions of pounds of investment there. So this is not about selling council assets. It's about working with us. You know, we'll enter into a lease for a roof, maybe if there was a solar PV going on a roof somewhere. But they will come in and work with property and our park service and look at our car parks and the park and rides in order to identify projects that can be undertaken to reduce carbon. A very brief history, and I've only got the one slide. We started this journey some time ago, I would acknowledge. We published a prospectus way back in May of 2018. It was 30 pages long, had lots of pictures and white space in it. It was a nice, easy read, but essentially it invited interest or expressions of interest from organisations that would like to participate in a future City Leap. It was very successful. We had 180 expressions of interest. We met with pretty much everybody, and a number of those organisations are actually the ones that are currently part of the procurement. And in terms of where we are at the moment, we did go to Cabinet back in April 2019, where our budget envelope was approved, and we did have an initial procurement, which unfortunately we had to bring to an end and start over again. So this is the timeline of current procurement that we are running and are in the midst of. So once we had Cabinet approval back in July 2020 to recommence with the new procurement, we put a concession notice out in August 2020, shortlisted 3 bidders who responded, and that led to what we refer to as the invitation to participate, the ITP stage. It's essentially a dialogue stage, which is what we've been doing ever since, but that is about to conclude by around mid-August when we publish the final invitation to tender, and that will eventually lead, once we've been through bid submission and evaluation, to a Cabinet decision to appoint the preferred bidder, currently scheduled for February 2022. So in terms of the shortlisted bidders, this is public domain information. It was a Cabinet report that we took to Cabinet back in December of last year. So Amoresco, who are working with Vattenfall as their essential subcontractor. Amoresco, American company originally, but in this country for some years now, worked with a number of local authorities doing low carbon projects. And Vattenfall are a Swedish state energy company, specifically focusing on heat networks in the context of City Leap. ENGIE are in consortium with Sumitomo Corporation, and E.ON, who I'm sure you're familiar with, are in consortium with Marubeni. So Sumitomo and Marubeni are both Japanese conglomerates and have long-term interest in City Leap, as have many of the other bidders. So in terms of just looking ahead, so to recap, we're currently targeting mid-August for the publication of this invitation to tender, having concluded the dialogue stage, which we're very close to now. And around September, October, most likely October, we'll be providing an update to Cabinet. And then in mid-November, we'll be receiving the final bids, and that leads to the Cabinet approval in February of next year. Then we need to go through a setup phase, obviously, and it is slightly dependent on what the bidders propose in terms of their solution. So we think it will be of the order of 3 to 4 months, but yeah, is TBC. And that concludes. So that's, just want to do a very brief overview, just to get everyone up to speed with where we are at the moment, and obviously happy to answer questions as part of the session.
Thank you, David. I also wondered if you could introduce yourself and what your job title is for transparency of who has been talking to us.
Absolutely, apologies, should have done that right off the bat, shouldn't I? I'm David White, I'm Head of Energy Services. It's my substantive post, but currently I'm focused fully on City Leap, so I'm seconded into the Head of City Leap post.
Thank you very much. I see a hand there from Councillor Weston, but I also know that Stephen Peacock wanted to speak in a moment, quite possibly answering Councillor Weston's hand. So I'm going to let Stephen Peacock go next, if that's okay.
Gosh, we'll see. Thank you, Chair. I did just think it would be helpful to set out a few points in response to the public statement, I think, which was read out earlier on behalf of Councillor Gollop, if that's okay. So there
if
are
you could also introduce yourself. Sorry,
yes,
I don't
I'm
like
so
to
sorry.
assume.
This is terrible. We all get used to this real world again. Stephen Peacock, I'm the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration, so City Leap falls within my portfolio. So as I say, I'll just go through a few things that I know that Councillor Gollop wanted members to be aware of and give some responses. So there was a reference to the role of OSM in looking at the arrangements around control and governance. I think there was a suggestion that that may not now be happening. So I just wanted to remind those members who may have been around at the time that OSM had an exempt session on scrutiny on governance and control in March. Quite detailed discussion did take place. It was an offer we made last year, and which was eventually taken up by OSM in March. So we did go through that. I'm sure we can arrange to share the information if members would like to see what was shared at that point, and we can do so again with new members. Another point was the reference to a decision having been made that the 50% ownership would be held directly by the council. Again, just to confirm a few points there. So all council shareholdings are held in effect by the council itself. The council is the shareholder, and the mayor delegates responsibility for shareholding to a designate, which in this instance at the moment is Councillor Cheney. So Councillor Cheney acts as the shareholder. The shareholder group, on which I believe Councillor Gollop sits as an observer, did actually go through the options for holding the shares in JVCo in January.
I'm just going to jump in to clarify that Councillor Gollop has been replaced by myself because that observer post is reserved for OSM chair.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to take up my place at the most recent one because of previous engagement, but I will be attending from now on. Yeah.
Okay, it's just because I know this was of interest. In January, the shareholder group did actually discuss this. So the decision was made that the council should be the direct shareholder of CityLeap JVCo. I understand it's not a key decision or reserve matter decision, but I'm assured, although I wasn't directly involved, that all of that discussion was done in an appropriate way, and all the minutes, etc., are mapped. So that process is how that decision was made. Included in that was a discussion about the makeup of the board of CityLeap, the JVCo, and the number of directors and how the appointment would be handled by the council. The detail of that, if we wanted to get into it, would be something we could discuss in exempt session because it is actually a subject of significance in the procurement. But the principle of how the directors would be performing a function was actually discussed at that meeting, as was the role of scrutiny, this scrutiny and GNR scrutiny, in discussion of how the future governance of CityLeap should function. Now, it was a recommendation which was accepted that scrutiny should have a role in being able to see how the governance of the client function in particular would work. So there will be an opportunity to do that. And then the final point, I think, just to come full circle back to the question about how does scrutiny have a role and get to see what's being proposed. David mentioned earlier that we will be coming back to Cabinet early in the new year once we have a preferred bidder. Again, some of the complexities we could go into on another occasion. It's a little premature now with 3 bidders in live dialogue to get into real detail on every single point because the points vary between who are the bidders. So once we know the preferred bidder, we will obviously be coming back to Cabinet seeking or making a recommendation, at which point there will be a lot more detail, and we would recommend that scrutiny get involved at that point because there will be the full suite of governance and control arrangements, as well as things like how does the client function work, what do the directors do, etc., to have a full in-depth review.
Thank you. I'm going to let Councillor Weston, I assume he still has some questions or points, and then I'll be going to Councillor Fodor after that.
Thank you very much, Chair. A lot of that they've just heard is welcome, and I appreciate that. And I realise that things are going to develop as we move into preferred bidder. I'm just conscious, and I know Councillor Gollop is, that we can't have a situation where the only person in the chamber that knows what's going on outside of the executive is yourself. How that develops, and even if it's a case of just having a regular briefing or something else, can be worked out in time, but we need to know, or I'm not on OSM, you guys are going to need to know what's happening. It can't just be down to yourself and you've got no one to talk to. I mean, Jeff was in the situation where he knew what was happening and couldn't even tell me what was going on. Now, it's absurd that there's no one for him to bounce ideas and talk about. So however that develops, I utterly agree. And I'm comfortable with what you've said. And as long as it stays on the radar, that's good. I do have some questions regarding procurement. Can I move on to them now, or shall I wait? Okay. So my professional life is procurement and bid writing and all the rest of it. So I'm gamekeeper and poacher in real life. How are you going to select the bidder? Because obviously when you're doing the normal economic, there's like 60% quality, 40% price, or however you balance the various things. How is this one going to be assessed? How's it going to be scored? Or is that confidential?
I'm afraid it is, but we would be happy to discuss it in an exempt session.
I don't think colleagues probably want to do that. Can I rephrase it then? Is there going to be a balance of quality and price element to it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
If we collect a few questions that justify an exempt session, we can go into it. So keep that one in the back of your head in case that seems like a sensible thing to do. Okay, Councillor Foda.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, I'm delighted with the update. You'll know I've attended many of the briefings and scrutiny sessions in the past. So let's hope we do get to 2022 and get this going now, finally. I'm interested in the framework that's been proposed, well, we assume has been proposed in this, and how it relates to the council estate. That's something that will affect a lot of services, a lot of functions, potentially assets, land, buildings, facilities we have. So one question would be, at what point will we know what that kind of offers each service? And that's partly relevant to those us councillors and residents, but also for the scrutiny of all of those strategies and plans coming up in the next few years, to know what will be kind of available to call in, you know, offer a framework and change our services or improve them, hopefully, improve our facilities and efficiency. So that's one question. Shall I go through them all? So I'm reassured by the fact that only the heat network as an asset is being put into this, because I think there were quite a lot of people who've been worried that our kind of wind or solar or other assets are being kind of handed over. So thank you for that reassurance. The next question relates to the role of communities, and wearing another hat, and one where I would emphasize there's absolutely no conflict of interest or declaration needed. I was invited to comment on a survey of community energy groups and community organisations about what they'd like done to their community buildings and facilities. And then I looked more kind of depth, and it said, if there is a scheme which might be available that could help you do them up and make them more energy efficient. And I found that really frustrating, because lots of people have just been surveyed. It's called the Sonnet project. I'm sure you're aware. It's great we've got that project, but it's offering something that hypothetically might relate to one of those three partners who might be appointed and then might choose to offer services to community buildings. So I kind of felt that it's either premature or something's being planned that we don't know we can plan yet. So I think there's been a lot of frustration because people have started filling this in and then said, oh, it only might happen, it only might be available. Why are we going to tell them what we want to do before we know it's actually available? And it will have raised hopes, if nothing else. So it would be helpful to know why that was scheduled in this sort of way before we even know who the partner might be. And then finally, the services in scope diagram was very impressive, and it covers loads of opportunities across the whole council. But kind of one of my worries is not only how it might change those services, but how it might change once it's in the hands of a chosen partner with their framework. How will it affect the commercialization program that we've been kind of contributing to over, well, supposedly over several years, and we don't know what the targets are for that and whether they'll be affected by some other partner delivering these things in those services rather than the services having the opportunity to innovate, have commercialization opportunities, concessions, new services to offer, but not now get the income, because commercialization was meant to help the services, not a City Leap partner. So I'm just slightly worried. Do we need a briefing on how commercialization will interact with City Leap? And that would be helpful too. Thank you.
Does one of you want to pick those points up?
Do you want to go first?
I'll pick up on certainly on the community one. I mean, we've long held that the community has an absolutely crucial role to play in City Leap. We cannot do City Leap to the city, can't do carbon neutrality to the city. That's self-evident. And we have always had an objective. I think it's in the cabinet papers that we've published previously, certainly back in April 2019, which makes it very clear that it is one of the 6 objectives of City Leap that the community gets a significant role and a say, opportunities to invest and participate in delivery. It's really important that that happens, and I think it's fair to say that all of the bidders have taken that on board and have engaged extensively with a very wide range of groups in Bristol, which is heartening to see that they are choosing to understand the Bristol landscape. We're not in direct control of what they're doing, though, so apologies for the frustration caused, but I'm glad that they're out there trying to gain the information to essentially put their best foot forward when they do come to final bid.
Without straying to further than I can, I think it is important to reflect what David has just said. They are three very different organisations, and clearly we are in a procurement, and so we're in a slightly unusual position where really good to see the enthusiasm and engagement they are looking to have, but they aren't all going to win. So they are having to balance that as well, just as we are. And on your point about the interface with things like commercialisation, I think it is a good point you've made. It also, of course, links into all of our agendas as a council. So how does City Leap enable or frustrate, if we get it wrong, other things the council is trying to do? There isn't one answer, although we could go into some of the commercial sort of possibilities in an exempt session. And once we know who our preferred bidder is, we'll absolutely want to talk about it with you and them. But the answer to the question is the primary focus here is on decarbonisation. And we mustn't forget that. But we do have a duty to deliver best value in all the other senses as well to people in Bristol. So we're trying to obviously put a lot into this.
Could I just comment further on that one point?
Briefly, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. That's helpful, and you're right. So, social value is important, so is decarbonisation. There are 2 points around that, just to keep it brief. One is kind of the interaction, and you said that would have to probably come into an exempt session, but let's try and avoid that. Secondly, there's the phenomenon called kind of bid candy in the procurement, the sort of social value in procurement sector, where I have personally met organisations that said they were written into people's bids and they never heard from them again after they won those bids. So let's hope, this is something to look out for, or a caution. We don't want there to be some organisations happily being the bid candy and then turning around and saying, oh, they've never come back to us, nothing ever happened. So let's try and avoid that. But in terms of the decarbonisation, I did mean to ask, and I think it's important to know, how far will this 20-year thing from 2022 onwards get us to our 2030 targets? Because actually, that's the one we've adopted as a local authority and for the city. So will it help us get at least the local authority to that target, or is it a bit of that target? How much will we know?
That all depends on what we receive in bids, because that's one of the things we're evaluating.
Okay, I think I had Councillor Kent next.
Thanks. I'm quite new to City Leap, so I've been mostly just trying to get my head around what is it? That's the first question, which whenever I talk with anybody else, they ask me, what is it? So no offence, the slideshow didn't really answer that, but I have read through the prospectus. I guess at this point, putting that aside, I can sort of see where your bidders could become in very different bids, because it's a fairly open prospectus of these are opportunities and very large sums of money. And I guess probably my slightly cautious negativity, occasionally I've been called a bit of negativity, I apologise if that comes out, of just what is our exposure, I guess, is my question at this stage. So here we're going to set up a joint company, which will be 50% owned by either side. Obviously, that brings a certain amount of expectation on what we bring to the table financially and hopefully with expertise, but also it brings a share of risk, one suspects. And I just think getting to the bottom of what is our level of exposure, and you may not be able to answer that in normal session, that might have to be answered in exempt session, and understanding the governance arrangements would be useful. When it comes to scrutiny, I do think we need to learn from the mistakes of the past. Personally, I believe that either a specific subcommittee should be put in place, which might just scrutinise either City Leap or all of the companies we have, or this committee should expect to meet often, more often, to fulfill that role. I don't really mind which way we go, but I think what we do need to do is make sure that we are scrutinising this far more, because one presumes, given that it looks like there are real potential gains if you pull this off, that also comes with a certain level of risk. And I think us understanding that risk and working with you to manage that risk is something which we need to make sure is in place now.
Thank you. To answer your first question, that is not a stupid question, because it's often the first thing that everybody asks me. So I had a go at writing something down a while ago. So this is what I say to people. City Leap is a long-term partnership between the council and a private sector organisation to accelerate green energy investments in Bristol and help us achieve our net zero carbon ambition. So it's acceleration, it's focus, it's bringing someone in who's got the technology, but also the finance to accelerate the transition. There's some things we could talk about in the open session around risk, and there's some things that we can talk about at length in exempt session. I think from my perspective, and bearing in mind we've been doing this a while, David and me, the two risks that are that stand up, above everything are that we don't find a preferred partner we want to do business with. And that is always a risk in a procurement. And if you don't have that as a risk, then you leave yourself, at risk of making a bad decision, because this has to work for Bristol. So that's the first risk, that we find a partner we want to do business with. The second risk is that then that partnership does not deliver the outcome we're looking to procure, because it's not like buying, it's not a transactional one-off deal. This is an unusual situation where we're procuring something and yet it truly is a partnership for the long term. And clearly there's an element of uncertainty whenever you embark on something that novel, that whether or not it's going to deliver the promise. So those are the two risks. Everything else, the political leadership will take a view on whether they like what's on offer. That's why we're bringing it back to cabinet. And obviously you'll have a chance to scrutinise what we're proposing at that point. But the key questions are, will we get what we have set out to achieve? It's £1 billion investment we're trying to secure. So clearly there's an element that, you can't deny that might not happen. But, the risk reward looks pretty good on the basis of the prize.
I've got a couple of hands lined up, but I had put my own hand up to myself, so I'm just going to jump in quickly. It seems like there's a few obvious actions that have been implied by some of the things that have been discussed so far, so I'm just going to attempt to capture some of those as we go along. One is that it sounds like we should make sure that we schedule an OSM at the right time to look at the next stage of City Leap. So would I be able to action one or both of you to liaise with Lucy about when that needs to be? You also mentioned that some written briefing documents were sent to the previous, I can't remember if you said the previous OSM or the previous GNR scrutiny.
I believe it was OSM, but Lucy, correct me, it was March. We can find out and we'll work with Lucy.
Since we've had an almost complete change of personnel from the previous OSM, I assume I speak for everyone when I say, could we see that as well, please? Thank you. I'm not going to make a firm decision now, but there was a suggestion of having either a subgroup or OSM looking at this regularly, which I think we should hold that idea in the back of our minds while we hear the other points and come back to that before we close. Okay, I have Councillor Morris next and then Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. The two comments I want to make. One is, it sounds like for City Leap to be successful, we have to ensure we have robust contract management systems in place. So that means obviously my 6 years experience on the council would suggest that hasn't always been the case. So what reassurance do I have that that will change? And my second comment is around the council estates. So if, for example, there's a block of council flats, of which 1 or 2 happen to be privately owned, will there be an assumption that the person who privately owns that property will be expected to contribute to the cost of any sort of decarbonisation work in the whole building?
Thank you. On the question of contract management, the answer is we know that's a big part of making this work. So we're looking at that as much as a client function as anything. So a team that will work council side to ensure that the opportunities that are identified can turn into actual projects. Because effectively, if you look at this as a partnership, the contract, yes, it has will have provisions in it like monitoring progress towards achievement of a business plan, but the real trick here is ensuring the council facilitates the strategic partner, the city lead partner, getting into the opportunities. And again, some things that we can say in public forum, but your example, if we take a general example, the answer to what would be expected is subject to acceptance criteria, which are all part of the contract. So we're not going to be placing any unreasonable expectation on any individual to take something that's offered and have to pay for it. That reasonableness test is a key part of it. They're not going to be descending on a building and requiring everybody to pay up to decarbonize their own building. It's much more contractual than that, and there'll be much more safeguards in it in terms of what we call project acceptance criteria, which are part of the very live discussions happening in rooms elsewhere with all the bidders, because that is a key part of giving a bidder some confidence that they can go at an opportunity, but not having a situation where we don't retain some control over things that we care about to do with reputation or fair pricing or those other issues around protecting consumers. So that's the stuff of lots of discussions, which as I say, would probably need to continue in exempt session.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. On the scrutiny point, we want scrutiny at the right time, but we must also have it in good time, because these are decisions involving very large sums of money over a very long period of time. So we want to make sure that that we get it right, and that scrutiny has the opportunity to present a considered opinion to Cabinet at the right time. The other point is, whilst I've just said we want to engage at the right time and in good time, Mike, Stephen and David are very aware that I am incredibly impatient on this stuff. You're all very well aware of this, aren't you? I've probably shouted at you all before now. I'm very impatient about this stuff. I am an early adopter myself. I came prepared. I have here the invoice for my own solar panel array. And the amounts are over $7,500, but the date on the invoice is the 4th of November, 2011. So 10 years ago. Now, we can talk about feed. Oh yeah, but you were getting the feed-in tariff. But some of these things are not new technology. It's not new technology, and in many cases, we either have or we could have the skills within the organization already. So I'm very impatient. We've had plenty long enough under a number of regimes, because I don't want to encourage anyone to come out and blame this regime for a lack of speed on this particular issue, because this covers a number of regimes could have done something about this. So we'll not be having any politicking over this. but we could have got stuck in a long time ago. And we are in actual fact coming quite late, I feel quite late. We're, you know what, we're the first at the traps, aren't we, on this? No one else is doing this stuff. But local government is quite late to this game, could have been a lot earlier, hence my immense impatience. So I guess what I'm saying is, come on, chaps, get your fingers out. That might get me in trouble upstairs.
Councillor Wilcox and then Councillor Weston after that.
Thank you, Chair. So I wasn't privy to the previous rounds of emails to previous OSM committees. So I had to delve into what information was publicly available about the City Leap project because the PowerPoint was a bit light on information for us to scrutinise. So I've read the prospectus and I've also found the Appendix A Cabinet report. And right at the back of the Cabinet report is the proposal for a strategic heat main. And I'm wondering if, or I would like to ask the question, is the strategic heat main part of the bidding process that you're talking about, please?
For the benefit of anybody who's not familiar with what the strategic heat main is.
I could give you a lovely diagram running from Avonmouth via Lockleys and Southmead all the way down to Lawrence Hill.
So for the benefit of those who haven't done the research that you have, Councillor, so we did look a little while ago now at the potential to bring in waste heat from the energy from waste plants out at Avonmouth into the city centre, because at the moment that heat is escaping, essentially. We did an initial feasibility study because we need to bring the heat into the city centre where the heat network will be and has the highest heat density. So it is viable and it's very expensive, which is why the council hasn't gone ahead and done it. We have obviously shared that feasibility study with the bidders, and it will be for them to decide whether they believe it to be a good way to go in terms of the development of the heat network. So we have made them aware of the possibility. It's not ours to give, if you see what I mean. It's, they need to decide whether they want to invest what is a very substantial sum of money into that heat main.
So it's not part of the current procurement process?
It's not an asset of ours. No, we certainly haven't built anything to enable that to happen yet.
Thank you.
Councillor Morrison needs to leave us because of a prior commitment. I'm noting that we are substantially over time, so I would very much like to wrap up soon. Councillor Weston.
My point, Chair, was simply when we're talking about when we come in to scrutinise, the Cabinet report is earmarked for the 15th of February. I would suggest that before that is probably when we need to come in on it. I don't think we can scrutinise the procurement process. That is incredibly commercially sensitive, and that's why they're doing it. But once a recommendation is made, and before Cabinet makes a decision, I would have thought OSM's point to scrutinise the recommendation and provide insight. That's, I think, when OSM probably next comes into leap.
And as Councillor Pearce says, in good time, i.e. not the week before it goes to Cabinet. Yes, Stephen.
Only to say, I think I completely agree that would be the right time. I would also suggest that just in the nature of these things, there will undoubtedly be commercially sensitive matters, and therefore you may wish to also have an exempt session, because subject to the appetite that you may have, there'll be a lot of detail, and it would be probably a richer session if you can do some of it exempt. We obviously know we try to minimise that, but as we felt today, we've
certainly have to all be exempt that meeting.
That's what I meant. Yes. So there will be a public-facing Cabinet report, which we can discuss in full session. But then I think the real substance of the commercial arrangements, like in other areas where we have done this with OSM members in the past, are best done in a exempt session for the free discussion.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree, and obviously I would aim to schedule much more than the time we've had this time to delve into it in more detail. Councillor Fodor had a quick point.
Yeah, sure. It might be one for a future exempt session, but one of my worries, well, I've been very keen to see this make progress over the years, and obviously I've asked quite a few things over the years. but one of the frustrations is worrying that we're holding back from projects because of the capacity it's taken to develop this enormous project. And you said yourself, David, you are now this, you've got this wider role, but actually all your time is on City Leap currently. So it worries me that we've kind of held off some other things other councils have been doing, community projects have been doing, collaborations have been kind of left pending. And you'll be aware of one I've asked questions around getting community investment into real projects, which other councils have been doing for the last year or more. And we're kind of leaving them parked in case one of the partners does do it with us. So that's frustrating. Is that something we can discuss in more detail when there's opportunity to be, let's say, more frank about it?
I mean, I'm very pleased to say there's a very able acting head of energy services whilst I've been off doing City Leap, who's been doing an excellent job in, while I have been doing this project. I mean, we've obviously made significant progress on the heat network, and we've absolutely have strived to essentially be business as usual, because to stop projects because City Leap is coming down the line would be the wrong thing to do. That carbon neutrality target isn't going out, it's coming at us very fast indeed. I mean, on the community point, so I would genuinely say that I feel the service is, I mean, I know the service is working flat out for my regular catch-ups with Steve Ransom, who's the acting head. Yeah, I think we've kept going. On the community side, I mean, I'm not as close to it at the moment, I have to admit, so I'm slightly nervous about, saying anything and then having to be corrected. But yeah, I believe we are still investigating the potential for sort of community municipal bonds and the like. So I don't believe that work's been stopped either. It's whether you have the visibility of the progress that's been made. I think perhaps we ought to make sure that you get up to date on that.
Sure, it was just a previous answer, if I could just say, it was a previous answer from a previous cabinet member who said that will be what one of the partners will do for us. And I thought, well, it hasn't been needed by the 3 other councils who've just got on and done it in the last year. So why are we waiting for a partner to do it for us?
Okay. So it's been pointed out to me quite rightly that I was jumping ahead of myself talking about making decisions about subgroups, and that's something that we should take to agenda setting in September. So let's, stick that on the agenda for the agenda setting. And yeah, just to add, I should have said this earlier when I was saying yes, please, on behalf of everyone to getting those documents. In particular, I will be attending the next shareholder group meeting in a couple of weeks. So if I could get them before then so that I can get myself fully up to speed, that would be fantastic. Are there any final points? Otherwise, I'm minded to bring this meeting to a close. Yeah, go for it.
Just on that issue about how you scrutinise going forward and subgroup or not, I think one of the points Stephen was making was when we have the proposal from the bidder, that will also include the proposed governance arrangement. So it'll actually be easier for you to make that decision at that point, which won't be in September. So I just suggest you might wrap that up as part of the scrutiny session in the run into cabinet when you'll have a set of proposals around governance.
We might be talking cross purposes. I'm not sure. I wasn't suggesting scrutinising it in September. I was suggesting in September we are setting our scrutiny work programme. So that was just about deciding whether it merits a subgroup or whether it should go to OSM. Or do you think even that?
And what I'm saying is whether or not that's appropriate will, I would have thought, partly be influenced by the proposals that have come from the bidder.
This links into the ongoing discussions both with bidders and with cabinet members over the nature of the arrangements that will be in place and subject to a cabinet decision. So things like how does a business plan get approved is itself part of ongoing discussions with bidders, and then will form the basis of a recommendation to cabinet. So scrutiny may wish to look at that because it will then provide as Mike has said, an indication of how scrutiny might be able to perform a function and what it will and will not really be able to do if that decision is then made.
I think you're quite right to take it to the September meeting, and because I understand what Mike's saying, that it will form part of the bids, But I think it's perfectly right for Osm to have a view of how it would like its scrutiny to function, to look at. So conscious that things might change in the September briefing, the February proposal, but I still think September should say from the outset to feed into thinking that it is our intention and our desire to have a standing working group or take it at Osm. I still think we can express an opinion, and I think we should do, and I think that September would be the right place to do that.
That would have a material impact on a procurement. So that is why, if indeed it's the slightly circular nature of this, is that's why such things should be discussed in exempt session, because if you imagine bidders are listening to this discussion, that would have an impact potentially on the risk that they would attract to this opportunity, which is why we've tried to avoid such discussions in open sessions. And it would be difficult while we were evaluating bidders' submissions in September to talk about that in open session, because the level of council control is a material consideration both for us and the bidders.
Okay.
We're not talking about council control. We're talking about how we would scrutinise what the LEAP programme is doing. It's not council control. We don't have control. The mayor has control. I'm not quite sure where this is coming from.
Yeah, when I was talking about the subgroup, and I'll let Councillor Kent come in just a second to see if that was what he was thinking as well. I didn't necessarily mean a subgroup going on in perpetuity, scrutinising the work of City Leap forever. I more meant scrutinising what happens next. And so that would less be control over the whole partnership forever, rather than just sort of inputting at that particular point in time in what the governance might look like. But I think we probably don't have time to go into that in huge detail. I'm going to come to Councillor Kent and then make a proposal to wrap up.
I think what we're seeing here is quite a key principle, isn't it? That if we wait till February, we will be told what we're allowed to look at. If we start discussing this in September, you can feed back what we wish to look at. And I think for any partners that are watching, that's how you build confidence, actually, by sharing information, working together. It's how you build a long-term project. When you exclude people, when you put just one director on a board and information is flown through just one person, that's when you get into big problems. So if you want to bring, especially a public body, which involves accountability, also back to the people with you, what you need to do is make sure you've got robust systems in place right at the beginning. Whether this is a short-term or long-term thing, I hadn't even thought about. One would hope that after a year or so, you would have quite an embedded program of works. And hopefully by then, those works will be discussed more in public session rather than private session. I'm fully aware, especially in the build-up to this and at the beginning, there will be a lot more private session elements. But at the moment, you've got 3 competing bidders, probably with very different projects as well. So you clearly, I fully understand why you have to be careful what you say in open session. But I think you need to bring all of us with you on this as well. I mean, that is very, very important with a public body. And that's why I was suggesting I didn't actually have what that should look like. And it could very well be us meeting more regularly, possibly in private session. I don't know.
Thank you. I'm going to suggest that rather than trying to thrash this out now when we're running horribly behind schedule, that we probably draw this to a close now, but that some subgroup, and I suggest that it is just Osm Leads for the sake of a body that already exists, discusses what order we want to make these decisions, and we liaise with the 2 of you about how that fits in, not having any great detailed discussions in those meetings as they're private, but just figuring out what order we want to do the key things, and then we come back and say that in a future public meeting or in the scrutiny agenda setting in September, once we've got our ducks in a row a bit more. And finally, just to say, as a couple of members have referred to the risk of me being the only non-executive member sitting in on those meetings, just to say for the record, I'm not taking that remotely personally, and I completely agree, and I would much rather not be, for it not to be all on me to to keep an eye on that. So yeah, I would love to see what items can come to the rest of OSM to do so, while appreciating that not everything will be able to, obviously. But yeah, I perfectly acknowledge that that's not my personal background and strong point, so I want to be able to share that with all of my colleagues. All right, I think we're done there. So thank you very much, and I'm so sorry again for overrunning. We had a lot of meaty items this evening. Thank you. Good night.